a couple of senators that have reached out that are traveling and are en route and maybe a couple minutes away. Plus, I don't want to cut into our presenters' time because I know they've got a lot of information for us. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Labor Force Participation Study Group Committee. I appreciate the work that people have already done for this, and what they will do is we try to gather information to address our workforce in the state of Mississippi to increase participation, which ultimately increases resources available to our citizens, to your constituents, people that are working, gainfully employed, and can make those decisions. I'd like to thank the members. I know that we have lives and jobs outside of the legislature, and I thank you for making the time to be here with us. Appreciate Chairman Bell from the House joining us, my contemporary on the other side of the hall, and thankful for the work that he's done in this arena, and thank you to Pat for putting all this together. Just a couple of things before we begin. We had Corey Miller, the state economist, with us in our first Economic and Workforce Development Committee meeting this year, and we talked about the labor force participation rate. Our rate hovers around 49th or 50th in the country, around 53.7, 53.9%. And it's an interesting calculation. I'm going to save that, for maybe some of the discussions we have with our presenters. But at the end of the day, no matter what the metric, the survey used by the Department of Labor, we are not where we would like to be. So you'll notice there is a little green piece of paper that just simply says the labor force participation rate is the number of employed plus unemployed divided by the civilian non-institutionalized population. It's a little deeper than that, but some of the issues and why we have some of the agency presenters today is that disability is something that I believe we rank second in the country percentage-wise, and there is no adjustment in the labor force participation rate for disabled population. So that becomes an issue. Institutionalized, whether you're in a nursing facility, incarcerated, we have one of the highest incarceration percentages in the world per capita. So those things factor into our formula. But the people that we have today, the first three presenters we have are from state agencies, and I've asked them to share with us not only an overview of what their agency does briefly, but particularly what they do in helping people be skilled or upskilled. And one of the forefront things with labor force participation rate, I understand that there's a great desire to raise the number, that would be a metric and a measure of success if we could simply raise the number. But if we take someone who's making $8 to $10 an hour and they're upskilled, working with all our partners, whether it's in employment security, rehab services, Accelerate, K-12, community college, IHL, all the presenters you're going to hear from, and that person makes $20 an hour, their life may change, or they make $60,000 a year, but that won't change the labor force participation rate one penny. So I want to stay focused on the main thing. I realize that we want to raise the number, but most of all, we want to raise the GDP of people working in the state of Mississippi. So with that, I would welcome the Executive Director from the Mississippi Department of Employment Security, Mr. Bill Ashley. If you'd come forward to the podium. Mr. Ashley, I know you have some folks with you. Obviously, you have some prepared remarks, I think, for us, and then allow some time for questions. Of course, feel free to call on anyone in your group if you receive a question from someone on the committee that you would like to have assistance with that. But Mr. Ashley is newly the Executive Director. I'll let him tell us a little bit about himself also, and I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Got my timer going. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Ashley, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Employment Security, Office of the Governor. We are the state workforce agency for the state of Mississippi. MDHS is a federally funded state agency. The agency's primary programs are funded by the U.S. Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. and are as follows. Employment uninsurance or insurance UI. We also market this as reemployment assistance. We have employment services, ES, or service, ES, and that's also combined with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA activities. And then we also have labor market information. I'm going to talk about these three major functions throughout the course of our presentation. Excuse me, I'm ahead. Slide 3. The current population survey is the official labor force participation rate that the senator just alluded to. The U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey, or ACS, is an ongoing survey that provides vital information about our nation and its people, and I will be using the American Community Survey data for this presentation. You'll have to pardon me, the numbers of the slides are not up here on the bottom right. I have to go back to my book here. Here we go. Slide 4. The CPS estimate is monthly, but it's narrow. The ACS estimate is for every year or every 5 years. The ACS year or 5-year estimates are more robust as they offer more granularity regarding county level data. And per the U.S. Census Bureau, these will be more accurate. It's just that they're not as timely. CPS is done monthly. ACS is done either 1-year increment or 5-year increments. Again, with the granular data provided by the ACS, we can paint a more detailed picture of our communities and of our state. Slide 6 shows the ACS labor force participation rate for 16 years of age and older as 57.2% in 2022, compared to the United States overall, which is 63.5%. So in ACS terms, there is a 6.3 percentage point gap between Mississippi and the nation. This slide shows the ACS labor force participation rate for 16 and older in Mississippi, comparing the labor force participation of groups based on race. Slide 8, this shows the ACS 5-year estimate labor force participation rates for 16 years of age and older based on age groups. It is interesting to note that the prime age labor force gap is more narrow than other groups. The prime aged labor force is comprised of people between the ages of 25 and 54 years of age. Again, that's the prime age group of the workforce between 25 and 54 years of age. Slide 9 discusses the ACS labor force participation rate for 20 to 64-year-olds based on gender and is compared between Mississippi and the nation. There is a significant gap between male and female in Mississippi, as well as the nation as a whole, as well as the participation gap for male and females for the United States too. Slide 10. This slide shows the American Community Survey, ACS 2022, ACS 5-year estimates for labor force participation rate for 16 years of age and older in Mississippi by county. The table and stars depict the 10 Mississippi counties with the highest labor force participation rate. The darker the county, the higher the participation rate, according to the American Community Survey, or ACS. And again, I want to point out, I'm using ACS data, not CPS, okay? Slide 11. Conversely, slide 11 depicts the same map, but with a table and stars that highlight the 10 counties with the lowest labor force participation rate and the geographic distribution. Slide 12. This slide shows the percentage point change and the labor force participation rate 5-year estimates between 2018 ACS 5-year estimates and the 2022 ACS 5-year estimates. Again, this is a percentage point change, not a percent change. So we're looking at these counties and we're looking at how they fared from 2018's last 5-year ACS estimate to the most current ACS estimate of 2022. Again, it also depicts the 10 Mississippi counties with the greatest positive percent point change in labor force participation rate between 2018 and 2022. The stars show the geographic distribution of the counties with the greatest change. A few observations. Per the ACS, here on our graphic, only 2 counties, Itawamba and Webster, had an increase in the population estimate. None of the counties in the top 10 had an increase in the population of 16 and over. However, all of the counties, or all the top 10, had an increase in the number of the population 16 years and over in the labor force. Again, that's more people participating in the top line. Okay, we talked about labor force, okay, is comprised of the employed and unemployed divided by the 16-year and old population that's non-institutionalized as civilian. Okay, so again, that calculation is similar, but again, we're looking at the number of people in these counties that are in the labor force that are 16 and over that are actively in the labor force, and the percentage point change from pre-COVID in 2018, okay, to 2022 is displayed here in this graph. Slide 13 displays the counties with the greatest negative percentage point change in labor force participation rate between 2018 and 2022. All 10 counties had a decrease in the number of the population 16 years of age or over in the labor force. You'll see the arrows. Amite, Yalobusha, Franklin, and Montgomery counties all had an increase in the population 16 years and older. Amite, Stone, and Yalobusha all had increases in the estimated populations between 2018 and 2022. Again, that was all U.S. Census data coming from the American Community Survey estimates from 2022 5-year. The other portion of the agency, I'll begin talking about LMI. LMI is the Labor Market Information Group. I have my LMI group here with me, in addition to Kerry McCon, my, Director of Training and Strategic Projects, as well as my Deputy Executive Director, Jason Pope, for Workforce Program Services. LMI, I've got Mary Willoughby, Chief Economist, and Robert Box in charge of all the data, and he's in charge of our performance measures. I think I named everybody. Thanks, team. So MDES LMI section starts here on slide 14 in your handout. And again, it's obscured in the bottom right on the video. That's slide 14. So if you're following along, bottom right, that's your slide number. Now this section, these few reports contain jobs data and not people data. What that means is you could have more than one job, okay? So we have jobs that we're accounting for, and then there's labor force that we're accounting for. Okay, one's jobs based as far as how we account for these jobs, the other is going to be who's doing the job. So the first section here starts off with jobs data, and that's denoted in the top right of your handout, jobs data. So slide 14 outlines the quarterly census of employment and wages, or the QCEW. The QCEW tells us employment and wages by county and industry based on the NAICS code, or the North American Industrial Classification System, or NAICS. And this is completed by employers quarterly. Employers quarterly. The limitations. This data set is establishment based. It's where the businesses are and no demographic information on employees. As far as timeliness, we must wait for reports and edits from our Mississippi businesses. The strengths of the QCEW, it's the least estimated data, as QCEW is required for employers to report their quarterly employment and wages. MDEA uses this to build requirements for employee compensation and economic development projects. Least estimated. CPS estimated 60,000 households are queried monthly by CPS or by the Census Bureau. That's across the entire nation of 326 million. Okay. That equates to about 1,000 for us, maybe, okay, as far as the CPS. Whereas this data, this is what we're collecting internally at MDES. And this is important because we're building this out based on the quarterly employment and wages for multiple reasons. So we're talking about unemployment insurance. We're also talking about incentives. When we're talking about private businesses and MDA, we want to incentivize companies that are going to pay us more. And again, they look at this QCEW data, they meaning MDA. Slide 15. Again, slide 15 depicts jobs data and not people data. CES is monthly employment and wage estimates for the state and also our MSAs or metropolitan statistical areas. CES is a product or is produced with data from the QCEW and non-covered employment and is gathered monthly from a survey of less than 2,000 employees or employers here in Mississippi. The limitations, it's establishment based, it's where the businesses are, and no demographic information on employees. The strengths of this data, that it's timelier as it's produced monthly. CES. Slide 16. Again, this is jobs data continued and not people data. In July 2024, it was a record month for Mississippi as the non-farm employment was the highest in history at 192,000. August 24, the non-farm payroll is 1,189,300. It should be noted that slide 16 displays seasonally adjusted data, which has had the effects of normal seasonal variations removed, like holidays, school openings and closings, and weather, etc. This makes it easier to observe cyclical and other economic trends. Slide 17 is jobs versus people data. Again, it's jobs data. The Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics, or OEWS, estimates employment and wages by occupation. We're using Standard Occupational Classification System, or SOC codes. You may have heard that. OES is a survey of approximately 4,000 employers. It is a survey of employers for specific locations. Employers are selected from QCEW records. The limitations of this data, again, it's establishment-based, it's where the businesses are, and no demographic information on employees, only job titles. The strengths of this data, it helps students decide what occupation to pursue, helps job seekers decide which jobs to accept, and potential and current employers in deciding competitive compensation for Mississippi's job market. Slide 18, still on people data. It's not jobs data. Okay, so excuse me, we've changed. We've gone from jobs to people. So now we're talking about people, top right, people data. We're on slide 18. LAOS, or local area unemployment statistics. These are monthly estimates of civilian labor force, number of employed, and number of unemployed for the state, all our MSAs, our workforce development areas, our counties, and select cities. Monthly estimate of labor force participation rate for the state. It's also the CPS is conducted by U.S. Census, and it's done on less than 1,000 households in Mississippi. Again, ACS data is going to come to your house. The census is quite adamant about people filling that form out. CPS, not so much. It's going to be multiple formats on how you're going to get maybe a phone call. I don't necessarily pick up my phone when I get a phone call that I don't know the number to. There could be issues with that. Okay, and again, as far as CPS, it's an estimate. ACS is an estimate, but I think that ACS, as I've talked about, is a little bit more granular and can be more usable when we're talking about the people that we're trying to find and help in Mississippi. Now, again, the limitations. It's residence-based. It's where people live. Again, no demography. We only know employed and unemployed. It's not as robust as the ACS. The strengths, it is a major economic indicator per BLS. It's more timely than ACS because it happens every month. And again, it's why we're all hanging out here today. Slide 19 shows the seasonally adjusted labor force estimate for Mississippi and the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate. Labor force again equals employed plus unemployed. In August of 24, we had 1,212,800 people employed in the labor force. And we also had 33,500 unemployed people in the labor force. So we have 1.2 million people in the labor force, and you see that number has been climbing. And again, we're using seasonally adjusted data. So it helps us see the smoothing, and we see the effects of the seasonality removed. Again, August 2024, the unemployment rate for Mississippi is 2.7%, and the nation as a whole is 4.2%. Our final survey, slide 20, is the census of fatal occupational injuries. Now we're moving into employment service, or ES. I'm leading with Wagner-Peyser. Slide 21. MDES, employment service, or ES, performance begins on slide 21. Wagner-Peyser, as amended in Title III of WIOA, is the backbone of the employment service. The U.S. Employment Service, or ES, was established 91 years ago by the Wagner-Peyser Act in response to massive unemployment during the Great Depression. The Wagner-Peyser Act laid the foundation for a coordinated, comprehensive job matching network around the United States. In Mississippi, this is called the Workforce Investment Network, or WIN Job Centers. They also could be called the American Job Centers. But again, in Mississippi, the front door of Wagner-Peyser is the WIN Job Center. The ES, or Employment Service, had its start as an agency to refer unemployed persons to work on public works programs established under the New Deal in response to the Great Depression. The ES, or Employment Service, is a labor exchange between buyers and sellers of labor and skills, job seekers and employers. ES has evolved to meet changing economic and labor market dynamics over its almost 100 years of existence. MDES is the state workforce agency. And through this capacity with Wagner-Peyser, we help job seekers and we help employers. Job seekers, we help search and we help place them in positions. We have information on and referral to training. That's how we work with our WIOA partners at the local level, Accelerate Mississippi as well. We offer internet access for job openings and resume postings and access to office equipment. So people can walk in and seek services, okay, that will help them facilitate a job search. As far as employers, we help employers list job vacancy orders. We help with recruitment and screening. We do training through our training partners. Again, we're not a trainer, but we help funnel people that need to be trained to the training partners, which could be community colleges or anybody on the ETBL list. We provide labor market information on wages and employment trends. Another portion of ES is WIOA, and WIOA stands for, again, for Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act since 2014 or 15. It requires that American Job Centers or our WIN Job Centers, they cannot be standalone. They got to be interlaced with the other programs that are included in WIOA. So essentially, employment services or Wagner-Peyser, that's the end product. That's get you a job. And this is how you sell yourself. We're also taking employers' job orders. The WIOA side of it, as far as adult dislocated workers and also trade assistants, et cetera, okay, youth, all those programs are what I call axe sharpening activities. Time spent sharpening the axe is well spent before going into the woods. Wagner-Peyser or employment service, that's used to, after that process is done, to see what's out there, to find a job. Also on the employer side, I need a robust data set to go look for employees. So MDES is the conduit by which workforce development is financed, as around $30 million flows into the state, okay, from ETA, Employment Training Administration, to MDES, and then it's 60 to 85% of that is distributed to the local workforce development areas. We have 4. On the other side, on the state side, MDES collects between $25 to $29 million in the training tax we also call the Workforce Enhancement Training Fund, and also Mississippi Works. We collect this through a 0.2 training tax on top of the reported wages of covered employers for their essentially their employees. Okay, so Mississippi businesses pay this tax for unemployment insurance, and from that unemployment insurance, we take care of their needs when they lose their job through no fault of their own. Or we also have this part that essentially is administered by the Community College Board, as well as Accelerate, or the Office of Workforce Development. Okay, so that's the key relationship to understand there. And again, this is about a $60 million a year deal that goes into to work with our workforce here in Mississippi. Again, WIOA is $30 million on average, give or take. It floats based on unemployment rates. And then we also have between 25 and mostly 25 to $23 million a year in wet funds collections through MDS's unemployment insurance process. In program year 22, this is Wagner Pizer. So these are the people that sought and got a service through MDES, through Win Job Center, or they could have self-served online, and we can identify them as receiving Wagner Pizer services, and they got a job. Okay, so I'll go back to my script. So in program year 2022, Mississippi led the nation in both second and fourth quarters in the employment rate of individuals who use Wagner Pizer services, meaning that actual employments of 24,773 and 24,486 respectively for the second and fourth quarters were still employed at an actual rate of 80.4% and 78.8% respectively for the second and fourth quarters. This was the highest employment rate of any U.S. state. For perspective, 166 million people are in the United States labor force. Again, we have 1.2 million, there'll be a test. All right, but in the whole country, we have 166 million people in the labor force. And as far as Wagner Pizer, 2.3. We have 2.3 million people in the whole country that are going through Wagner Pizer services. Now in Mississippi, we have averaged 34,000 to 38,000 participants in program years 20, 21, and 22, with 24,000 or so who are employed at 70 to 80% after the second and fourth quarters. So it is evident that the employees like working for the employers, and the employers like their work enough to keep them employed. We know this as we mean MDES, we track UI wage data quarterly and know by social security numbers who is and who is not working and who received Wagner Pizer services or employment services. And it could be at the Win Job Center, they could self-serve online. We have call centers as well. It is evident that we are punching above our weight as other states that have more total population and more people in their labor force don't produce the same absolute number of employees that are still retained at the second and fourth quarters. For example, Mississippi here, when we're talking about the fourth quarter rate of 78.8%, there were 24,773 people that were employed at the end of the fourth quarter for 2020 or program year 2022. And compared to Alabama, they had about 26,000 or so to our 24,700. You see the other states, okay? Now, when you talk about Alabama, they got 5.1 million people. We have 2.9 million people or so. So there's a big discrepancy in the two states' populations. So again, I contend we're punching above our weight. Now, this wasn't always so. This is since 2020. Prior to 2020, instead of the 38,000 or so, 30 to 38,000, basically people that went through this program are participants, okay? That's small. Prior to the pandemic, we had like 97,000, and we're in the top 12 counties. We're not in the top 1 or 2, okay? So, and the way my mind works, if you look at our unemployment rate being so low, it's, well, we better keep what we have. And of course, you see this as far as these employment rates, okay, being 78 and 80%, okay? So Mississippi employers, the way I read this, really like them because our unemployment rate's so low, okay? You got to compete more. And again, I hope you have a handout. If you don't, I have extra. Okay, I'll just kind of hit this. this sounds like graduation. So it's what this sounds like. I'm the principal at graduation. Mississippi led the nation in the fourth quarter employment rate for females for program year 22, as well as for males. Slide 23. Mississippi led the nation in the fourth quarter rate for prime age workers from 25 to 54-year-olds for program year 2022. Slide 24. Mississippi led the nation in the fourth quarter employment rate for Black or African Americans for program year 2022. And of course, if you have the handout, it's important to note so we're beating national averages, but at the same time, we're absolutely at the top. Now, what you'll also notice in data is that the median earnings, our median earnings are very low, if not the lowest. So although we are increasing the number or the percentage of the number of people that are being retained in second and fourth quarter, we see we're struggling with the average or the median earnings, from that. So again, we're collecting all this behind the scenes with UI data.
Mr. Director, I hate to interrupt you, but we're at 1:30 and you're about halfway through the packet. I want the committee to have time.
I'm gonna move quick in 8 minutes. What, do I have enough? 8 minutes?
I want the committee to have time for questions.
Yes.
So we're at 1:30. So I realize we've done well in the second and fourth quarters of 22.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. All right, so let's look at it from the standpoint of the interrelation between MDA and Accelerate Mississippi. MDA represents the business side, business and industry, and Mississippi Department of Employment and Security represents the supply side or the participants. Okay, and then of course you have Accelerate Mississippi, which is the coordinating entity. We did a survey early part of 2024, and what we found, out of the top 3 reasons of 1,000 folks surveyed, we found that the top 3 reasons would be: number 1, lack of opportunities; number 2, personal health; and number 3, opportunities that do not pay enough. Going back into what MDA does, they have a targeted industry list. Okay. What I did was take that targeted industry list and go back into census data and find all the businesses in Mississippi that are within those industries. And I calculated the number of firms, or tabulated the number of firms in each county. What you're seeing here, the darker the county, you have more firms, okay, that are in the incentivized industries of MDA. The stars represent the tops of these firms, if you will, ranking from I guess from highest to lowest. The stars are where the highest number of firms are that would hire you. Conversely, here's the location of where the stars are for places where you don't have as many firms. Again, these are firms and industries that we incentivize in Mississippi. There are 52 counties represented here from 2020 to 23 of where we had MDA announced capital investment as well as jobs. The stars indicate the highlights or the highest 20 out of the 52. We also worked on the top 32 sites in Mississippi. The sites are on the left. You have the stars where the MDA Win Job Centers are. On the right are the counties where the Win Job Centers are. So basically, if you look at opportunity, you see where the investment's gone, and you see our location and proximity to sites that the state of Mississippi has been investing in. Because time is of the essence, I'll talk about this as my final slide, and then I'll open this up for questions. What we did, Robert Bach, one of my people with me here today, and I had some questions that we sent in Spark, and we looked at 2023 specifically. So what we found were, again, people that were already in the labor force. There's 107,000 people. Okay, we're now on slide, make sure I give you the right slide number. $44, good deal. All right, so slide 44, thank you. All right, so what slide 44 depicts? All right, so we had this data mining operation to individually identify people by social security number. And again, this was done by NSPARC to protect the information. Okay, so there were SSNs that were looked at from 2015 to 2023. And from that, we found that there were 239,000 people that worked in the fourth quarter and then all of a sudden stopped in 2023 fourth quarter. Now they're in the labor force because if they ever were employed, and we would know it because they had UI wages, they'd filed a claim, or they were registered in Mississippi Works. However, if they weren't in any of that, we don't know who they are. So if they're working for a 1099 type job or other, we wouldn't know who they are. But here's the money shot, so to speak. MDES knows where there are 100,000 people or a little bit over, and here's the counties in which they're in. And we want to survey them to find out why they're not working. If we can find out why they're not working, maybe we can find out why people that aren't in the labor force aren't working as well. And with that, I yield my time and I open up the floor for questions.
Thank you. And I know you're having to cover a lot of ground, and I appreciate that. The couple things for me, and one of the things on our committee hearings are always broadcast, streamed, archived. So this is beneficial for somebody else asking questions down the road or wanting information. But I understand you chose to use some different data. I won't ask you to drill into that simply because you're trying to get a cleaner picture from our employment standpoint. One of the things that jumped out at me is that when we were looking at the percentages of employment, there was a bigger gap with male workforce participation for Mississippians versus national than female. So we're closer to the national average in the female population. Did I see that correct on the slide?
Which slide, sir?
Well, it just showed that the unemployment rate, you know, we talked about that, but we talked about workforce participation that was put up on the screen. And I apologize, I don't have the slide number in front of me, but the male rate was about an 8-point spread and the female rate was about a 5-point spread.
Let me get to that. I know what you're talking about.
And I guess I'm just trying to make sure I'm probably restating the obvious, but we have a smaller spread on the female side between the national workforce participation rate and the Mississippi workforce participation rate. The reason I ask that question is that single mothers are a focus for at least myself, and I think a lot of people in the legislature, to upskill. They are working, and I've had reports that they are at a much higher rate than potentially other populations in our state. So is there any focus at MDES that addresses female workforce participation or targets single mothers as far as upskilling? Or are you dealing mostly when someone is unemployed?
Well, yes, we have barriers to employment in there on the list based on socioeconomics. As far as low income, we're looking for that population. We do have targeted populations. So again, we're trying to get those populations into our funnel, so to speak. Now, with employment services, again, as I delineated that, so if you know what you want to do and you have your education, you got a profile with Mississippi Works, and you're looking for a job. Now, as far as some people and they might not necessarily be in that boat, but again, with the WIOA hub, and we have tools within our partners, our strategic partners with WIOA, or excuse me, our core partners with WIOA as well as our strategic. We have ways in which we can identify. So yes, they are a population that has significant barriers, and so yes, we work with that population.
But only if they're seeking work. It's not in your task to
we're obligated
down and see someone's wage is low and what can you do to raise it?
Well, we're obligated to do affirmative outreach by the U.S. Department of Labor. So we have to find people. We have to go out and look for these folks and advertise in markets where they may be. So I know we are mandated to work with populations that have significant barriers to employment.
Okay. And then I realize that you mentioned unemployment, and we're maybe 1.5 points better than the national unemployment rate, but the unemployment number, just to be clear, is only based on people actively seeking work.
Yes, as far as we track claimants, we have continuing claims, we have initial claims. So those are data points that we track. And of course, one of the things with the participation rate, if they're not employed and they're also not unemployed, they're not counted in the top line number. So yes,
they're not counted, meaning they hurt our number.
Well, they're in the bottom number, yes. Excuse me.
Which means the percentage.
Yeah, percent wise, yes.
That's my whole point. Everybody that wants to talk about the unemployment rate and act like we've solved the mystery of employment is not talking about those that are unemployed who are not seeking work anymore, because they're not even classified. So if they're not receiving unemployment benefits, they're not actively signed up with MDHS trying to seek employment, they are not counted against our unemployment rate, but they do hurt us on labor force participation.
Yes.
Okay, because I just want to make sure we understand that's the spread that we're fighting, where we have this wonderful unemployment number. And I like the raw data jobs number, but we're still with a low labor force participation rate.
Well, again, if you look at participate against CPS, that tool, the bottom line or the denominator is going to be population, non-institutionalized, that are 16 years of age or older, that are also not in the military. And of course, anybody that fits that category is going to be I say tugging or pulling down that participation rate. Yes.
All right. And then the final thing, and just for maybe my edification, the money that flows, you mentioned $30 million come from the federal government. Of course, you have directives you have to meet based on that money. And then the 25 to 29 million are actually dollars that come from Mississippi employers through the UI tax, and you utilize that. And then very briefly, and I will yield to my other committee members for questions, you do have a rapid response team.
Yes.
That if there is a layoff or a closure of a facility, can you briefly touch on that? And then I would yield to the committee for questions.
Yes, I know Pamela Hosey works with us at the agency. Whenever you have a WARN notice, she tracks this. It's on our website. Then through that WARN notice, we work with the company to try to have a soft landing, if you will, for the employees that will be eventually, if not already, laid off because of some it's a structural unemployment, if you will. It could be something related to markets somewhere else on the globe. It could be technology, could be related to that. But yes, we offer those rapid response services. And again, we're working with that population. Ideally, before they get disbanded, if the company will work with us, we could do it on site, then that's a lot easier process. But then we offer the full range of services that we, as well as our core partners with WIOA, have to offer as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to brag on your agency because I've utilized that in our area, and Daphne particularly is a rock star in your agency, but thank you. Committee members, yes, Senator Simmons.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I think at the beginning, you started off by talking about Mississippi has the highest incarceration rate. Well, not you, but Mr. Chairman, he actually mentioned that Mississippi has the highest incarceration rate in the world, basically. And as it relates to our labor force participation rate, of course, we have the lowest in the nation. And I was looking at slide number 29 as it relates to the summary of the responses for those who are not working. And I noticed at the bottom of the list, it was the ex-offender. Could you speak to that? Because I guess I'm more concerned about where are we really getting this data and what is the agency?
Well, yeah, this was a survey of about 50,000 people that we know about. Okay, so they're unemployment claimants. They could be just people that are in the U.S. system, or also Mississippi Works, which is our way we engage with Wagner Pfizer, so people can self-serve and create their profile. Mm-hmm. So again, that 50,000 whittled down. We asked them if we could survey them, and only 1,000 responded. So again, what I'm offering at the end of this presentation, there's about 107,000, which broadens that group, and we're going to get more intentional about doing qualitative work. Also, to offer a bright point, we in the second round of DOJ and DOE, I guess partnership, if you will, got about $8.3 million in the PROUD grant. And that's to specifically work with the federal prison in Yazoo City, as well as the three, I guess, halfway houses, the names escape me now, that are in Tupelo, Jackson, and also on the Gulf Coast, I believe, Gulfport, Hattiesburg, excuse me, I'm sorry. All right, so we're actively working on that population. To your point, they're not counted because they're institutionalized. When they come out, it's a good way to add to our participation rate, but I don't know how you measure it given the way that the statistics are set up. But I'll just use this point. I don't know how many of you go speckled trout fishing, but from my understanding, and again, I don't want to impeach myself here, I know the white trout, the guide lets me catch as many of those as he'll let me catch, because essentially they don't go against the slot limit. So again, that's a lot of fish right there. So when you start talking about disengaged veterans, or not disengaged, but they're coming out of service, or people that are coming out of being formerly incarcerated does help us because they weren't counted in any statistic. And to some degree, that would help us improve our workforce participation rate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm same page 29, childcare. Childcare, what this is the fifth, ranked number 5 in terms of barriers. Now, the individual, you say you surveyed 50,000.
We only got 1,000 to consent to being surveyed. So the population size for the survey was only 1,000.
Now, do you know how many of those individuals had a data to show how many had children?
I would have to refer to it. I did not bring that, but Robert, could you speak to that?
And the reason I ask that because what we hear most is childcare as being one of the main barriers to access and employment, and especially if on the low end of salary, you know, for childcare is expensive. A lot of persons choose not to, can't afford to be employed because the child care is more than they're earning. So I think that, I mean, I just don't see child care as being number 5, you know, in the, realistically, based on the, my limited experience and knowledge in terms of talking with individuals as far as employment or not taking employment. I would like to basically see, you know, if you have that information, I would like to, you know, see that.
Okay.
Any other committee member? Senator Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quickly, a kind of a high-level question, if you don't mind. Are you in MDS using the deployment of artificial intelligence to further carry out the mission? And if so, what are you doing? How are you using AI in that capacity?
Well, during post-COVID recovery, the federal government, U.S. Department of Labor, has modernization grants, and we're working with about $22.9 million for our modernization grant. Now, the history of MDES's involvement with UI, we were at the, I guess, early on an early adopter to shared services. We have the Reemploy USA, which is a consortium between us, Connecticut, and also New Hampshire. So that's a lot of UIs, what that means. So that contract is currently up for RFP. It's at ITS now. So going forward, we have, again, an additional $22 million for modernization. We like to say we're always modern, and that's the goal, to stay there. Now, we have met with Dr. Ogeron at ITS, as well as our current vendor, as well as a couple other vendors that want to come visit. And, you know, until that RFP goes out, I know we'll have a dark window at some point. But yes, to answer your question, we're looking at using, again, bots, or I say bots, chat bots slash AI technologies. And again, we've also met with a couple of vendors. We've had a long-standing relationship with TCS. Again, our current contract is like, it's got 33 amendments. So it's really time to be looked at. So I know that's in the process at ITS to be examined. So that'll be coming out. And again, our goal is to modernize our UI system.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions from the committee? Chairman Bell? No. Mr. Ashley, thank you very much. I appreciate the information, and I guess dovetailing into what Senator Williams asked as well, Senator Norwood, as we use technology more, I hope we can drill down to identify what's keeping people out of the market. And so that if there is a legislative way to address it, that's our goal. And the purpose of the hearing is to try to figure out if we can have legislation that assists the people who are helping people into our market.
Well, I look forward to that process. If you will, at the very back end, I have 4 recommendations. I'm trying to be proactive with that. As the true study group concept here, I hope we have more dialogue. And again, these are just initial ideas here that have come out based on our conversations previous. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will move ahead into the agenda with the Mississippi Department of Rehabilitation Services Executive Director, Billy Taylor. Please feel free to come forward to the podium, and you may begin when you are ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a few handouts we're going to pass out, so I'll give you 1 minute. Oh, you got them? Okay, great. Well, as the chairman said, my name is Billy Taylor. I'm the new executive director at the Mississippi Department of Rehabilitation Services. Been in the role about 4 months, so y'all take it easy on me. I have been at the agency for about 14 years. I was the Special Assistant Attorney General assigned to represent the agency, and then I was Chief of Staff most recently from the last 9 years or so. So I have with me our current Chief of Staff, Mr. Manager Murphy, our Finance Director, Andy Salen, and then our legislative team back there, Anna Tucker and Christy Embry, who everybody seems to know down here. So thank y'all for having me today. So I know when Chairman Sparks and I talked a little bit over these past couple of weeks, one of the things we wanted to look at was just the disability numbers generally in the state. So that's something, I don't have 42 slides or a whole lot of statistics on that, but I have a couple just kind of big picture numbers on the disability community that I thought are noteworthy. So according to the Census Bureau, and I know the chairman alluded to this earlier, we're second in the nation with 17% of our population having some disability. And that's according to the Census Bureau 2023. That's about 460 people in our state with a disability, according to that statistic. And then according to the CDC, we have about 824,000 individuals with a disability. So as you can see, 2 reputable entities looking at how many people have disabilities in our state and have very different numbers. I mean, it's almost 400,000 different between the CDC and the census. So to me, that just shows that the word disability it's just an ambiguous word. I mean, it's not like something that can be very clearly defined. Reasonable minds can differ about what exactly a disability is. The Social Security Administration, as y'all know, they issue the disability payments to our state. We have the SSI program, the SSDI program, and they issue payments to about 240,000 Mississippians a year, to the tune of about $240 million a month. So those are just some big picture numbers. I know those numbers are kind of all over the board, and I think that, like I said, kind of speaks to the point that just the word, disability is quite ambiguous. All right, so I wanted to provide a quick snapshot of what we do at MDRS, just a little agency overview. And, we like to refer to ourselves as the one-stop agency for Mississippians with disabilities. And our agency is really broken down into 2 sides. We have a workforce side, and the whole point of the workforce side is to really help with the workforce participation rate, get people into the workforce that may have some disability that's becoming an impairment to that. So that's one side of the agency. The other is more geared towards independent living type services. These are services for people that have more significant disabilities. They're, almost nursing home eligible in a lot of cases. So these people aren't necessarily looking to get into the workforce. They have pretty severe disabilities oftentimes. So we provide services to those 2 different shops through 4 major programs. Let me flip my slide here. Those 4 programs are the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for the Blind. So those are our 2 workforce-related programs. And then what we call basically the independent living side would be our disability determination services, which of course that's the service we provide to Social Security to help them make those decisions on disability claims. And then we have the Office of Special Disability Programs. So OSDP, that Office of Special Disability Programs, that's really geared towards helping our most significantly disabled population live independently. We mainly do that through operating 2 of the Medicaid waivers, and I'll kind of get into more details on that later in the presentation. But a quick kind of snapshot of where we are as an agency. We have about 45 offices statewide, about 950 employees. We spent $212 roughly $1 million last year. 35 million of that was from state support, which is about 16% of our total budget. And traditionally, we interact with usually around 75 to 100,000 Mississippians a year through one of these 4 major programs. So the first program I wanted to kind of dive in on a little bit is what we call VR, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. So what that program is, it's a mostly federally funded. There's a 21.3% state match that we put up to draw down those federal funds. And last year, it was a total of $75 million that we spent in that program. So that's about 35% of our budget. We have 125-ish counselors located around the state that work caseloads of individuals with disabilities looking to get into the workforce. They usually run about 85 to 100 people on their caseloads at a time. And, that's what they do. They run caseloads. A lot of them are specific caseloads. Like we have counselors that serve what we call the A&D population, alcohol and drug clients. We have counselors that are certified counselors for the deaf, RCDs. We have counselors that work general caseloads. We have counselors that work transition caseloads, those young adults trying to transition from school into the workforce. We have supported employment counselors out there that are helping individuals that really need that extra layer of support to be kind of taught the job on site before they can be fully employed by that employer. So a lot of counselors all over the state working these caseloads, trying to reach that goal of finding people with disabilities a job in our workforce. So a couple changes in that program I wanted to mention is about, I guess it was 2015 or so when the law was passed, that WIOA law that Mr. Ashley mentioned. It really changed the way that we do a couple things at our agency. So under that law, there was a new mandate or earmark that we spend 15% of our budget on pre-employment transition services. So that's services to individuals that are young adults, 14 to 22 years old. So before WIOA, we would typically start working with a client when they were about to enter the workforce. They were looking for a job. But through this new mandate, we are now required to spend, $10 or $11 million a year of our budget on these pre-employment transition services, trying to work with the students earlier in their life to get them prepared to enter the workforce. So we do things like career exploration, work-based learning. We counsel them on post-secondary ed options. We do workplace readiness, self-advocacy. So those are kind of the 5 pillars of those pre-ed services that we now provide around the state. And I also wanted to put a plug in for our project search program. This is something that's new in our VR office. We rolled it out 4 or 5 years ago with 1 site, and now we're up to 28 sites. And it's really been just a huge success. I mean, I think if y'all told me at the end of the legislative session next year that you cut our agency down to 1 pen, and you asked me to pick the 1 pen that we could keep in place for next year, it would probably be Faye Culpepper, the director of our project search program. It is the most impactful thing we have going at our agency right now. So what that is we partner with an employer. So the first site we have was at UMC, at the medical center downtown, and Rankin County schools. So we take young adults, typically in their senior year of high school, that are in their special ed program, and rather than go their senior year of high school to the high school, they go to the work site. So in that Rankin County example, they go to UMC every morning for their senior year of high school, and they do classroom activities there on site in the morning, and then they spend their afternoons rotating around different jobs within the university. There's been just a huge success rate, upwards of 80% of the individuals that are participating in this program in the 28 sites around the state now are finding employment, a lot of times with that employer, sometimes off-site at other employers. But most of these individuals who would have typically probably struggled to have a job right out of high school are now being employed through this project search program. So it's been a huge success, something we're really proud of. And we want to grow it as, as much as we can around the state. It's really provided just a great resource for young adults with disabilities and really helps us kind of focus on serving that new younger population that our federal partners want us to look at. And this next slide just kind of gives you a snapshot of the number of individuals that we serve in our VR program. So last year we served a total of 12,500 individuals. You'll see that we took 6,000 new applications. Of those, we made 5,300 or so eligible for our services. We developed 4,800 individualized plans for employment. That's one thing that's pretty unique about the VR and the VRB program is that it's all individualized. The client will sit down with one of our counselors and really work out, what does this individual need to reach their employment goal? And it's very much an individualized plan for employment. You'll see last year in this VR program that we successfully closed rehabilitated. That means closed with a job, 2,775 clients. So our second workforce-related program, very similar, same federal grant, but in our state statute, it's a different office, and that's the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for the Blind. And so they have counselors all over the state, not as many. As you know, the blind population is a lot smaller than just the general disability population. So we have about 20 counselors around the state. We spent $9 million last year in that program, which was about 4% of our total budget. And in our VRB program, we have a few kind of unique things going on. So we have the Addie McBride Center on the UMC campus. It's been there since the 70s. It's a joint agreement between our agency and UMC. And what they do there is they train people that are newly blind or going blind of how to live independently with their newfound circumstances. So they have, all kind of great trainings. There's dorms there where they come and live. So they have orientation and mobility training where they help them, learn how to use the white cane. We have, teach them Braille. They have personal management, like how to meal plan and how to shop. A lot of daily living type things, like how to, help match your clothes and how to do laundry. A lot of recreational and leisure type activities are done over at Addie McBride. And that's been going on there for decades and decades. We recently opened up what's called the Emerge Center down in Long Beach. So it's basically the same kind of thing as Addie McBride, but taught a different way. So Addie McBride, the way they teach the services there is they let the individual use whatever site they may have and try to optimize their abilities through the site they may have. The Emerge Center teaches through a method called structured discovery, which is assuming total blindness. So they put on the sleep shades and they teach all these same services, but with no visual aids at all. So we opened that about a year ago. It's a couple-year process to get the federal approval to get that going, but now that's up and running and slowly starting to serve some clients down there. So we've learned from the blind community that there's kind of a couple of different schools of thought as far as the approach that they would like to be taught how to live independently with their disability. And also wanted to mention the Business Enterprise Program. This is another program that's really old. It's been, I think it was passed at the federal level in 1936 or so a long time. And that gives blind individuals the right and priority to operate vending facilities on federal-owned property. And then our state years ago passed what we call a mini Randolph-Shepard Act, which allows the same priority on state-owned buildings. So you may see at some of our state and federal buildings, blind entrepreneurs operating their vending facilities, vending machines, cafeterias, that sort of thing. That's all done through our Business Enterprise Program, which is in this VRB office. These are some of the numbers served from our VRB office last year. So you'll see we served a total of 1,600 people, closed 308 of them successfully rehabilitated. We did 470 or so individualized plans for employment. We carried over 1,000. So sometimes it takes longer than a year to work a case. So that's why you see these carryover numbers is they may be, receiving services that take a little while for them to come full circle to ultimately land that job. So that's why you see the carryover numbers on both of those slides. So those two programs there are workforce-related programs. I have some smaller programs I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But what I wanted to do now, if y'all don't mind, is turn it over to my Chief of Staff, Ms. Samantha Murphy. So she's been the Director of our Disability Determination Services for the last number of years. Now, in the last 4 months, she's been Chief of Staff, but I would consider her the state expert on all things disability determination services related. So keep in mind, that's what they make the decision, the initial decision when somebody files for disability. So that they play a big part in that process. And Samantha will really wow y'all with her statistics on that program.
I don't know about all that. But... Okay, so what I'll try to do is give you an overview of the DDS program, but also tie in some relevant data that will speak to Mississippi's workforce participation rate. And as you know, if an individual is applying for disability benefits, they're not likely attempting to enter the workforce. But there are some mechanisms that Social Security has in place to allow those individuals to work and earn a certain amount of money per month. So I'll speak to some of those, but also some of the statistics related to our workloads and how once a person has received a disability decision, then they have an option. They can go through the appeals process, apply again, or they can decide that my claim was denied and I'm going to attempt to try to get back into the workforce. So the DDS program is 100% federally funded. And so there's no state dollars that go into the DDS. And that was a total of 27. I'm sorry. That was a total of 27 million last year for the DDS, and that's 12.9% of MDRS's budget. The DDS works in partnership with SSA. So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, you could really consider the DDS employees contract employees for SSA, but they're state employees. We abide by Social Security's rules for when someone is deemed eligible for disability. Everything that we do is governed by the Social Security Administration beyond personnel matters related to state employees. So we serve individuals from ages 0 to 65, and we don't process any payments. We don't determine payment amounts. All of the decisions that we make on the state level at the DDS are medical decisions. So a person would go into the Social Security office, apply online or over the phone, and the Social Security office would decide if they meet the technical requirements to apply. And then they would send the claim over to us for a medical determination. We have about 81 disability examiners that process claims for the entire state of Mississippi. And as you can see, this year to date, under the federal fiscal year, we've processed over 27,000 claims. And there are about 40 medical and psychological consultants that are also employed by the DDS to help us make decisions on those claims, and they have to sign off on everything that the disability examiners do. So Social Security's definition of disability is that an individual is not able to work. They're not able to engage in substantially gainful activity because of a mental or physical impairment that prevents them from working, or that is severe enough that it's going to last for more than 12 months or result in death. And the definition for children is a little bit of the same, but they look more at their functional limitation in comparison to their peers. So for fiscal year to date, we allowed 37.3% of the claims, the initial claims that we processed. So that's about 68% of individuals, I'm sorry, I'm terrible at math if that's wrong, of individuals who could either continue through the appeals process or decide that I'm not going to attempt to apply anymore and I'm going to enter the workforce. And then at the second level of appeal, we process about 5,200 of those claims. This is an individual who was denied benefits. They want to appeal it. It comes back to us. It goes to a different examiner, a different doctor, and we reverse about 21% of those cases. Doesn't necessarily mean that we made the wrong decision on the initial level. It could have been an error, but the majority of them are probably that the person's condition got worse. They increased in age and therefore made it more likely that they would be deemed disabled, or some other programmatic thing that changed in the time between they filed the initial claim and the reconsideration. And so the other claims that we also process are continuing disability reviews. And so these are individuals who have been deemed disabled, they're receiving benefits, and it comes back to us periodically to review to make sure that they still meet the requirements to be deemed disabled. And about 70% of those cases were continued. And so at that 30% cessation rate, that means that we're telling these people, you're no longer disabled. You can either appeal this decision as well, or you can attempt to re-enter the workforce. And the majority of individuals are going to try to appeal that decision, especially if they've been on for a really long time. But we do have about 6 hearing officers that work those appeals at the continuing disability review level. But there's also the administrative law judges that are employed by SSA who have about a 44% allowance rate on the initial level and at the CDR appeals level. So that means that once they get through all the steps within the DDS and then they get to the administrative law judge, they can then still be allowed. So the beneficiaries in Mississippi would include the individuals that we allow, but also the administrative law judges. Yeah. So currently, well, the most recent data available from SSA is from 2022. And the numbers for August of 2024 are not too different from this. So I'm pretty confident that this is an accurate reflection of Mississippi's disability beneficiaries. So for SSDI, and these are individuals who have worked and paid into the trust fund and are now no longer able to work and drawing on those benefits. And those are Title II claims. And in Mississippi, there are about 130,000 of those, with 174 million going out in monthly payments to Mississippians for Title II claims. And for Title 16 or SSI, this is supplemental security income, individuals who've never worked, but are disabled and feel that they cannot work and have been deemed disabled by the DDS or SSA. And this also includes children. They would fall under the SSI category. There are 107,000 recipients in Mississippi, and that's about 66 million monthly payments in the state. And I think Billy already shared what our total was. But really quickly, what I just want to kind of point out is that although we have a significant number of recipients in the state of Mississippi, SSA does allow disability recipients to enter the workforce if they don't earn over a certain amount of money per month. And that's called an SGA amount, substantially gainful activity amount. And it's something that anybody can Google. It's out there on the internet. And the amount changes with the COLA every year. And so for 2024, for blind individuals, it's $25.90 that they can earn a month and still keep their disability benefits. And for non-blind individuals, it's $15.50. And then there's also something called a trial work period, where SSA allows an individual to earn over the SGA amount for up to 9 months to see if they want to get back into the workforce. And if that's not successful, they're able to continue their benefits without having to reapply. And I won't bore you with all the technicalities of that because there are additional extended periods of eligibility related to that. But I thought it might be important to the committee to know that even individuals on Social Security disability benefits can earn and enter the workforce. So of these individuals that are receiving these benefits in Mississippi, I know Senator Sparks, you're a data guy. And there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's publicly available on SSA's website. I combed through it, and I felt like for the time that we had to share with you today, I really felt like it would bog everybody down. So I'm happy to share the links with the committee or help you navigate that data. But one of the things that I thought was important to mention in my research was that of the individuals in that 238,000, some of those individuals are also individuals receiving benefits due to age. And then there's also ways that Social Security calculates individuals that are receiving Social Security retirement and disability. It gets really complicated, but they do have a lot of demographics on their website about age, the counties in Mississippi where those recipients are, their sex, and they even had data out there about individuals who receive disability benefits but choose to re-enter the workforce. So you could really go down a rabbit hole if you're interested in looking, but I'm more than happy to help the committee navigate any of that data if you're interested in finding out more about that.
All right, thanks, Amanda. All right, I know we want to save some time for questions, so I was going to give just a 2-minute overview, if I could, of our last major program, which is the Office of Special Disability Programs. And that's our last independent living side of our agency. So the main thing that we do in this program is operate 2 of the Medicaid waivers. So we have the independent living waiver and the traumatic brain and spinal cord injury waiver. Currently, we have about 2,800 people on the IO waiver and 915 individuals on the traumatic brain and spinal cord injury waiver. And Medicaid does a study every year, and they've found that for individuals on the independent living waiver, that this waiver saves them $63,000 per participant per year compared to serving them on the waiver versus them being in a nursing home. And on the TBI SCI waiver, it's about $44,000 a year cheaper to serve them on the waiver than in a nursing home. And kind of a couple of unique things about the waivers: this is all self-directed care. These individuals are nursing home level if they wanted to be, but they are able to manage, make their own medical decisions, kind of, manage their own care, and they're choosing to live independently instead. So we provide those supports to make that happen. We have personal care attendants that go out and help them with their daily living type things, bathing, feeding, cooking, cleaning, all that sort of stuff. We currently, I guess to put this little plug in for our budget request, we currently pay those PCAs $11 an hour. We've put it in our budget request for next year to up that to $12 an hour, which is about a $1.1 million increase in state support to make that happen. So that's something we think would help with the retention rate on these personal care attendants, because we have about 4,000 of them that we hire each year to provide these services for the 2 waivers. So that's the OSDP program in a nutshell. I know we wanted to save a few minutes for questions, so I'll entertain questions at this time. Thank y'all.
Thank you very much for the information. I'm going to try to hit a couple of rapid fire questions. The rehabilitation part is, we're talking about earlier with employment services. Clearly, if somebody's not seeking employment, it's not good for the workforce participation rate, and it's not reflected in unemployment. You've touched on a couple of different things that your agency does. One is you're identifying young people who have some disability, it may be an IEP, it may be an autistic situation, it may be something that's going to impact potentially their employability. Is that what you're doing kind of with the WIOA program you talked about, as well as the Project Search?
That's right. Yeah, so traditionally, before WIOA was enacted about, 8 or 9 years ago now, we would start serving individuals when they were ready to enter the workforce. They would come to us and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. I have this disability that's going to, an impairment to that. And we would start trying to help them through that process. But when WIOA passed, it mandated to not only us, but all 49 other states that we spend 15% of our federal grant before that decision point of I'm looking for a job. They want us to start working with them 9th, 10th, 11th grade to provide those pre-employment transition services. That way they're kind of being primed, ready for the workforce, and thinking about having a job, more down the road. And we just are starting to, starting to put those services in the schools earlier than we have traditionally.
One of the things I hope we're doing in a lot of the parts of the hearings is we don't want to operate in silos as agencies spending money. We have career coaches. We're spending $16, $18 million a year. We have a new person for special populations. It sounds like if we hadn't met one another, we need to, because that's exactly what we have. If you've got an 80% placement rate out of that program, I don't know what your placement rate would have been before the program was, but assume it wasn't 80%. So you're putting people in the workforce that would otherwise not be there. As it relates to voc rehab, and I'm not asking for specific numbers, but maybe some follow-up in the future. Part of voc rehab is getting people back to work. I know we talked about disability determination. There's also voc rehab to keep people working, maybe to keep someone from going into disability. Can you touch briefly on the two sides of that? I mean, are we getting people that have at some point been deemed disabled back to work through rehab? And are we keeping people from going on disability through the rehab efforts?
Yeah, so it's both. I mean, we have, you kind of think about voc rehab as somebody with a disability that's looking for a job, and that's kind of what comes to top of mind first. But we serve a lot of individuals that are currently employed that come to us and say, hey, I have this impairment that's appeared in my life that I never have had to deal with before. And we will develop a plan, an individualized plan for employment, but it's an individualized plan to keep them employed or to advance their employment. So they may have a job doing, $20,000 a year job, but come to us, have a disability, and have a plan or a master, ultimate goal to get to a, higher skill level and ultimately a higher salary. And our counselors will develop that plan with that individual, and then we can help knock down those barriers, whatever that may be.
Then as far as disability claims and the year that was provided, is that typical? 27,000 claims, is that typical? New claims?
Since COVID, the application rate has declined. And so we aren't seeing as many people applying for disability in previous years, but there's also a decrease in the number of claims that we're able to process because of a lot of attrition, which has slowed over the last 2 years because we were able to work with the state personnel board to get our salaries up and recruit and retain staff. But we are currently still understaffed.
But as a general rule, is 27,000 claims for disability in the ballpark of our 10-year average?
No.
Well,
In the past, we've been able to assist other states because we were doing so well.
No, I'm just talking about the number of claims filed in a particular year. Is that what the 27,000 represents, or how many claims you processed?
So there are currently 16,000 claims in staging. So if you count the number of cases that we've processed in addition to the ones that are in staging, then that's, and that's just our initial claims. We would say there are about 50 to 60,000 that applied this year.
Okay, so we had 50 to 60,000 Mississippians in a average year are applying for some sort of disability benefits?
Yes.
In addition to the 200,000 or so that have, okay. And we're reviewing about 4,700. Can you just very briefly talk about what triggers a review? Because based on the stat, we'd reviewed 4,700. I guess in the program, if we've got 50,000 applications, or even if it's 25,000, but we're only reviewing 4,000 or 5,000, do we see a concern of not reviewing cases? I understand we have traumatic brain injury cases. We have very serious disabilities that it's not a reviewable issue. And I'll go ahead and ask my second question so you know why I'm asking this. I never hear anyone talk about working to make money while on disability.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe my colleagues have a different experience. It appears people are concerned about showing they can work so that they would lose their coverage. But if someone can make $1,550 a month and continue to draw their disability benefits, are we making that known? Is that something that we should be doing a better job with in conjunction with other state agencies?
Potentially, but To answer your first question, so the CDR reviews are not determined by the DDS. It's based on federal budgets, and so they determine, it's the only workload that is budgeted that we are mandated to meet. So the feds determine for the nation how many CDRs we're going to process, and the cases come back based on the number. So when a person is deemed disabled and we make that initial determination based on either their age, the severity of their impairment, or the nature of the condition and its ability to improve with treatment, we decide that we're either going to give this person anywhere from a 6-month, what we call a diary, to a 7-year diary for it to come back for us to review. And we don't always review them at the right diary date because it's based on the federal budget and how many CDRs they determine that we're going to process.
Okay, I find it interesting that you can make $1,550 a month, still draw your disability, and that would be a W-2 or a 1099. I mean, that's legitimately not the cash economy, because I do meet a lot of people who draw disability and do a little work on the side. But I just, I don't want the fact that they can make money and the fact that they can be reviewed cause them to fear going out and working. Because if they chose to work just a little bit, all of a sudden now they change the workforce participation rate, because the amount of work you have to do to be paid in a period is minuscule to qualify. So as much as I'm not trying to manipulate numbers, that actually could change the workforce participation rate within the population that you serve. Thank you very much. And I would yield to questions for the committee. Senator Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taylor, Madam, thank you for your time today. Just got a couple of questions. When you started, and I may have my numbers wrong, did you say that Mississippi, in the state of Mississippi, 17% of our people on unemployment, disability? Is that correct?
No, I believe I said 17% of our population, according to the Census Bureau, is disabled. Is that?
Okay. Do you know the percentage of our employable people draw disability? That, and the next follow-up is versus what the national average is.
So you said the percentage of employed people drawing disability?
The percentage of our population that draws disability, what is that percentage? And then what is that compared to the national percentage?
Yeah, I'd have to do some quick math here. So the number of individuals we have in our state receiving a Social Security disability check is 239,000 people. And we have, what, 3 million people? So that's probably 9.5%.
9%. Yeah. Just a lot of times in conversation, people say that our percentage of disabled individuals in the state is so high. I just wonder if there's any validity to that. It'd be nice to know those two numbers. If it'd be a way to kind of get to that, it's not a hard ask. That'd be nice to know. The second question is kind of what I did with the last speaker. Just curious as to how the agency is looking at using and maybe using artificial intelligence and what you're doing. If you could just speak to that very briefly.
Well, as far as artificial intelligence, we do have 15 community rehabilitation centers around the state, CRPs. We call them Ability Works. And I mean, in all honesty and full transparency, when I feel like I walk into one of those Ability Works, I feel like I'm walking in 1982. I mean, it is small manufacturing work going on, nothing really complicated. And I feel like it's time to revamp that system for how we train individuals with disabilities to get into the workplace. So I feel like the VR and the artificial intelligence could play a big role in that. And I've formed a committee of people to dive in and really look at revamping our Ability Work system and trying to get it into the next 20 years. Because I feel like it's done well over the past 30 or 40 years as a community rehab system, but I know times are changing and we're certainly exploring that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Taylor, for being here. I appreciate your remarks. My question is on the VR office, and you said you're helping students as early as 9th grade with their employability. Give me some examples of how you're reaching out to these students. How do you identify them? Are you working with districts? How does that process work? If you could explain that to me, please.
Yeah, so we have transition counselors, and they're job is to work with that transition age youth. There's those young individuals that are transitioning from school into the workforce. So it's their job to go out into the school districts, meet with the SPED directors, and they work caseloads of individuals from the school districts and try to perform those 5 functions that I laid out earlier of trying to get them thinking about their ultimate job earlier on in life. But we've had recent conversations with Department of Education, really trying to expand that because we just have a dozen or so transition counselors, and there's way more school districts and schools than what we have. So we're looking at some new ways of tackling that, possibly putting some contractual employees in to just give them the mandate to only do these pre-ed services, because these transition counselors also have transition caseloads that might not be just in the schools. But that is something we're looking to expand, because we have struggled to spend that 15% earmark each year. A lot of the states around the nation are struggling to spend their full 15% of their grant on the pre-employment transition.
It may behoove you to, like Chairman Sparks was indicating earlier, we got career coaches that are throughout just about almost every school district we have to work with them as well. They're there in the district. And try to reach more kids. I think that might be a way to, have some interoperability among agencies and so forth, like Mr. Chairman was saying. So, and how does that work? They identify them, they train them up, and then they work them. They go to work once they graduate school, or is it throughout the school year, or how's that work?
Yeah, so it's all individualized. I mean, some of them are ready to enter the workforce at 18 years old, and so they'd leave high school and go straight to get a job. Others, they may want to go to some kind of post-secondary ed or junior college. So that transition counselor, every student that's on their caseload, they develop an individualized plan, and that the fruits of that plan kind of come from those conversations under those pre-ed services. The career readiness and job exploration type discussions.
Does your office keep track of the numbers of students and track them on where they? Once you come and contact them, what their outcome is, or
yes,
so do you have those numbers anywhere?
I don't have the numbers of our transition caseloads with me. I certainly can get those to you, but our federal grant requires that we track that and submit it each year.
And that's part of that 15% you have to spend, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Norwood, did you have a question?
Most of it was answered, but I want to just one follow-up. For the children, for the students that are participating in the program, do you pay tuition, college tuition, or college fees?
Yes. So post-secondary ed is a service that we're able to provide. So if the individual has a disability and is eligible for our services, if that counselor and the client identify a career goal that requires additional training or schooling, we're able to cover basically any expense that's necessary to get that ultimate career goal reached.
Well, I guess one other question there. At McBride, has it been expanded or is it downsized?
It's this. We haven't expanded it or downsized. I mean, UMC has expanded all around us. I know 50 years ago when the building was built, it was, a totally different place than it is now. But we're still the same 5-story building right in the middle of UMC's campus. We haven't expanded or downsized.
Well, I guess I'm talking about from the service perspective.
So I know we serve, I think the last time I asked Dorothy that number, I think it was 100, a little north of 100 Mississippians each year at that Addie McBride Center. I'd have to pull some historical numbers to see what we typically have served, on a typical year. But I believe that's the last number I heard of what we've served out at Addie.
And that is employment, some employment capacity for those individuals, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's the ultimate goal. I mean, they usually come there. A lot of times they're newly blind, and so the first thing on their mind isn't, all right, what job am I going to have? I mean, the first thing they're trying to figure out to do is how to utilize Braille, how to use the white cane, just basic living type things. But they do have a VRB, vocational rehab for the blind counselor assigned to them, where once they figure out those initial, daily living type things, career, finding that ultimate career is the goal of that counselor that's assigned to that individual.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Norwood. Any other committee members have questions? Well, thank you for the presentation. One of the things that I will say as far as the waivers, independent living waiver, et cetera, I understand obviously that saves dollars versus someone being in the nursing home. But, you know, potentially the services that are offered could free up a family member to work who otherwise wouldn't be able to do that. And sometimes they are the PCAs that are utilized. So, you know, we will look at that and try to see what we can do, but.
Yeah, that's a great point. When we talked the other night, and I never really thought of OSTP or these two waivers playing much of a role in the workforce participation rate until you pointed that fact out. Like if somebody is receiving services on the waiver and it frees up their PCA or their family member that's a PCA to go get a different job, then that certainly would have an effect on the rate for sure.
Well, thank you and your team for your presentation, and we will take a brief break and be back at 2:45.
Thank y'all.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, it's just simply gonna be forward, back.
Oh,
all
so
this
the
stuff.
green is forward,
Yeah.
red is back.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then my concern, okay.
Yeah, should be. And if it, because I think the PDF should be fine.
Yeah.
But if you have any issues, just on the next slide, and I'll do it manually. It should be okay.
Oh, that's a new gig. Okay. Well, you know, all right. Okay, that's fine. No.
We'll go ahead and prepare to start back so we can stay on schedule and maybe end on schedule. The Executive Director of Mississippi Department of Human Services, Bob Anderson, is with us, and I think he's got some of his team. And we will turn the floor over to you. And of course, as I have asked, is give us some time for questions. You've got a little bit more time than prior presenters. I think we're slotted till 3:45. But I know we'll have some questions, and appreciate you and your team being here today. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. I have with me, just for your information, I have Chad Allgood. He is the director of our Division of Early Childhood Care and Development, otherwise known as our Child Care Division. Most of you, I think, know Alex Bucklew. He's our legislative liaison. And then sitting behind Chad is Mark Jones, who's our Chief Communications Officer. What I wanted to do, first of all, is just give you a quick overview, and this may be kind of repeat information for some of you, just a quick overview of the divisions that we have and what they do. And then I'm going to talk more specifically about those divisions that work with the workforce development issue and getting folks into the workforce. MDHS has 7 programmatic divisions, as you see here. We have Early Childhood Care and Development. We have the Division of Economic Assistance Eligibility. We have Workforce Development and Partnership Management. We have a Division of Aging and Adult Services, a Division of Community Services, and a Division of Child Support Enforcement, and lastly, our Division of Youth Services. Now, as some or all of you may already know, we're what I would call a highly leveraged agency when it comes to state funding versus federal funding. Approximately 4.3% of our agency's entire funding stream is state general fund. The other 96% is federal funds from I will say, a plethora of sources, from the Department of Agriculture, from Department of Health and Human Services. We get some from Department of Energy. It just covers a wide swath of various different funding streams. So to talk a little bit about each of the divisions, just briefly, Early Childhood Care and Development, it obviously provides services for children and families through our Child Care Payment Program, also known as our voucher program. And we issue under our Child Care Payment Program certificates to families that receive TANF, families that are experiencing homelessness, families that are caring for foster children, working poor families, students, and individuals with special needs. To qualify, and this is something that gets overlooked quite a bit, to qualify for one of those vouchers, a parent has to be employed 24 hours a week or enrolled in a full-time educational program, moving toward some certificate or degree. And there's an income cap of 85% of the state median income. The funding for that division primarily is federal funds. We get $121 million a year in federal funding from the Office of Childcare, which is part of the Administration for Children and Families, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. About $6 million in matching state funds is added to that. And then to keep the level of vouchers up where they need to be, we have added in the last year $25 million in TANF funding is converted to child care development funds for vouchers. Economic assistance eligibility, they administer a large number, and the largest number of people are served in the federal grant programs that they administer. The one you're all probably most familiar with is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also formerly known as the Food Stamp Program. That's our largest program in the agency. We, at any given time, are serving anywhere from 350 to 600 or more thousand people During the last fiscal year, we had about 400,000 and we distributed $837 million in SNAP benefits to those 400,000 recipients. We have a much smaller program called the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which just helps supplement the food needs for low income and elderly individuals. That is about a $1.6 million program. Then the Department of Agriculture requires us to administer, as part of our participating in the SNAP program, something called the SNAP Ed program, which educates people primarily in how to have healthy food in their diets, how to eat healthy and how to have an active, healthy lifestyle. The feds fund that to the tune of about $5.5 million a year. And then we have one other program called the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, again, to assist in supplementing the diets of low-income persons 60 years or older. We have about $1 million in the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. The other major program in economic assistance is the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Block Grant, or the TANF program, as you've heard it spoken about. We receive each year about $86 million in a state family assistance grant. It's a block grant. Out of that 86 million, at least based on our current enrollment, about 6 million of that goes directly to cash assistance. And then workforce development programs are also funded out of the TANF program. The Division of Workforce Development and Partnership Management is under the umbrella of our economic programs, and they administer some programs that are designed. I'm going to talk a little more about them in a moment, but they are designed to move people into the workforce. So we have the SNAP Employment and Training Program, known generally as the SNAP E&T program, and it's intended to train people who aren't in the workforce to get them ready to get into the workforce. We also have workforce training and education programs that we participate in with our SNAP subgrantees, after school programs and activities that allow children to have a place to be after school. If their parents are working, it's still a good idea to have something for the children to do. Our TANF program, because TANF is a work fair program, we have the TANF work program, which is designed to meet the work requirements for TANF recipients. We do assessments, we do credentialing, we do planning, we do barrier mitigation assessment, like looking at transportation needs and job placement. And then we have some parenthood initiatives that division also administers as part of the TANF program to encourage both the formation and the maintenance of two-parent families. This slide looks to me to be a repeat. I'm going to skip over it because it's everything I just talked about. Division of Aging and Adult Services, as you might imagine from its name, it is designed to assist aging and vulnerable adults, families, and caregivers to have a healthy, safe, and independent lifestyle. It works in conjunction with, if you're familiar with the home and community-based services program that Medicaid administers to keep senior adults who are capable of staying in their homes, our Aging and Adult Services program works along with that program. We have the State Health Insurance Assistance Program, which helps folks navigate the Medicare and Medicaid world. Then we have the Access to Care centers, which help connect people, both older people and folks with disabilities, with long-term care and other healthcare supports for them. We served about 22,000 in the fiscal year 23. We also have a home delivered meals program. I'll be quick to point out it is not a Meals on Wheels in the sense that it's not ready to eat hot meals that we deliver. We deliver frozen meals that are freezer ready, and then the resident can store that in their fridge and fix it at their own leisure so that we don't have to worry about their being ready to eat when the meal arrives. We also provide congregate meals at elderly community centers. Those are ready-to-eat meals that folks can eat in a community center. We offer homemaker services similar to what Medicaid does under the HCBS waiver. And we offer respite services as well for families that have the care of a senior adult. It's a good idea now and then to take a break. And we offer a voucher of about $590 for a family to hire a personal care assistant to come into their home and give the primary caretaker an opportunity to take a weekend off and have personal care needs of their loved one taken care of. Then we also provide through our aging program some transportation assistance, helping folks to get to medical appointments and shopping needs and just other needs for elderly adults. Then the rest of our Division of Aging and Adult Services has the Adult Protective Services Program, and that's a statewide program that's designed to protect vulnerable adults from being adversely affected by abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. We have investigators who, when they receive complaints, either from a family member, from a neighbor, from a community member, that they suspect a elderly adult or vulnerable adult who may be a disabled individual has been abused or neglected, or their finances are being exploited by a family member or caretaker. And our investigators go in and validate or refute those allegations. If we determine that the abuse, the neglect, or the financial exploitation is sufficient enough, we will refer that to law enforcement, generally to the vulnerable adult unit in the Attorney General's office. And we have a long-term care ombudsman program that cares for our residents in long-term care facilities all across the state. The ombudsman, we have regional ombudsmen who are connected with our area agencies on aging, which are housed in all of our planning and development districts. And the ombudsman's job basically is to be a voice for the resident of long-term care facilities. And they go in, make sure that the medical and physical needs of those residents are being addressed. And if they aren't, then they will report that but first to our supervision, and then if necessary to law enforcement so that it can be addressed appropriately. There are also occasionally involuntary discharges from nursing homes, and our long-term care ombudsman will represent the interest in terms of speaking as a representative for a resident. You know, sometimes you have a resident who's just become too unruly and too hard to control within a nursing home, and we have to find another placement for them, sometimes in another home, sometimes in a hospital, sometimes out of state. And the long-term care ombudsman help those placements take place. Our Division of Medicaid offers a fair hearing to any long-term care resident who is facing an involuntary discharge from a nursing home. Our Division of Community Services, it's really designed to address more day-to-day sort of needs for clients and long-term challenges like the condition of their home that are a result of their living in poverty and living in substandard housing. We have a community services block grant that provides services to help folks in these situations in poverty deal with finding adequate housing, securing some educational opportunities, and then retaining employment. We also have the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, also known as LIHEAP. And the LIHEAP program operates in the summertime to help pay those bills for keeping a home cool. In the wintertime, they pay CenterPoint and other gas and propane providers to help keep a home heated in the wintertime. The community action agencies and the human resource service agencies across the state partner with us. In fact, they are statutorily designated as our partners, so we don't actually choose them. They're written into the statute. The community action agencies and the human resource service agencies are the ones who administer the LIHEAP program. And the way it works is we issue a voucher to a family, but the payment goes directly to the utility company. And then we have a weatherization assistance program. As you might imagine, some homes are not very weather resistant. They're not well insulated, and the weatherization program is a way that we can enforce the comfort of those homes by insulating them, sometimes repairing and replacing windows, and just kind of strengthening those homes to make them more comfortable. All together for the Community Service Block Grant, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and the Weatherization Program, we received about $50 million in federal, and that's 100% federal program. We get about 50 million each year. Child support enforcement is another one of our really large divisions. We manage a caseload along with a legal services partner that you're familiar with named Young Williams. We manage a caseload of 234,000 plus cases. And during the most recent federal fiscal year numbers that I have, we actually located almost 49,000 parents to get them into a support order so they would begin paying child support for their children. We established paternity for thousands of children who were born out of wedlock. And currently, when we get a name of a putative parent provided to us, about 96% of the time, or 95.5% of the time, we are able to establish paternity. And once we establish paternity, the next step is to put a support order in place for that parent to begin to pay child support. We get about $31 million in federal funding. We draw that down on a 66 to 34% match, 66% federal money, 34% state match. We also have a access and visitation program, which allows non-custodial parents to have just what it says, access and visitation to their children. We're in the process of developing a fatherhood initiative as well. And one of the aspects of the fatherhood initiative that will be, I think, of interest to this group is part of what our fatherhood initiative will be designed to do is take those non-custodial fathers who are not employed and begin to find connections within their community to get them into the workforce, because obviously an unemployed parent can't do a very good job of paying child support. And so our fatherhood initiative is intended to work hand in hand with our access and visitation program, but also designed to try to place unemployed fathers into jobs. We are in the planning stages of that. We have a 4-county pilot we're running right now. We're about to submit a proposal to our federal partner, the Office of Child Support Services, which will allow us then to expand that fatherhood initiative to a statewide program. We have incentive funds on hand that we have earned based on the way our program operates efficiently. Our program operates, our child support program is one of the most efficient in the country. We have a return on investment of about $12 for every dollar that we spend on the program. And so we earn some incentive funds, but we have to ask our federal partner for permission to use those incentive funds for things like the Fatherhood Initiative. And the last programmatic division we have is our Youth Services Division. That's the juvenile justice aspect of our work. We have there are two sections in that division. There's a community services section, which basically supplies youth court counselors to all of the youth court judges, chancellors, and referees who operate our youth court system. They are, for all practical purposes, the probation officers for the juvenile justice system in every county. And then the institution section of our youth services division is Oakley Youth Development Center, which is the only state-run residential facility for youth who have been adjudicated delinquent. And basically, you wind up at Oakley if the act that you committed would be a felony if you were charged and tried as an adult. Oakley and the Youth Services Division operates pretty much exclusively on state funds, and it draws down the largest portion of our state general fund at about $19.5 million. Okay, talk a little bit now about workforce programs. Again, I mentioned the three primary programs that we have are the SNAP program, and the feds have some interesting requirements that make some of these programs difficult for us to operate. The SNAP program requires all able-bodied adults without dependents to be working or actively engaged in work training or educational programs. And so in each of our county offices, our eligibility staff have kind of a dual purpose of making sure folks are eligible for SNAP, but making sure they're also actively employed or looking for work. And I don't know how much of this Bill Ashley may have spoken about earlier, but that can be pretty difficult in a lot of counties where there just aren't a lot of options for jobs, for places to refer folks to. The TANF program as well has a work component. You'll remember back in 1996 when we went from the aid to families with dependent children version of welfare essentially to the temporary assistance to needy families, we added a work requirement known as the TANF work program. Now, the other thing about the TANF program that often gets overlooked is it only has a 5-year or 60-month maximum for anybody to receive TANF benefits. That's where it gets the name temporary. It's intended to be, and I agree with some of the testimony I heard yesterday on Capitol Hill that TANF is intended to be a springboard in order to get people into the workforce. It's not intended to be a long-term solution. The only exemption for beyond that 60-month period is families that are what we call child-only TANF cases, where a child, for example, is living with a disabled grandparent or other family member who really doesn't have any income, and it would not be reasonable to try to get that adult into the workforce, but the child still needs the assistance of the TANF program. And then the child care development program, I'm going to talk about some more, because frankly, when it comes to touching the workforce and having an impact on the workforce, I think our child care program, you'll see, is probably the largest and the most meaningful part of the picture for what we do at the Department of Human Services. The TANF program, part of the reason it's not, the TANF work program doesn't have a huge impact is as you've heard time and again, we just don't have the enrollment. Our statewide enrollment in the TANF program right now is about 15 to 1,800 people statewide. And I think for another day, we could maybe talk about why that enrollment is so low, but it is that low. And so the TANF work program is simply not a major piece of our involvement in getting people into the workforce because we just don't have that many people in the program. The early child care payment program, on the other hand, has a large impact. Our program, as you see, serves right now over 34,000 children each month. And that is an increase. We made a change in policy last May where we removed what was the child support cooperation requirement, where you had to cooperate and participate in our child support program in order to get a child care voucher. The governor's Early Childhood Advisory Committee unanimously recommended to the governor, and he authorized us to remove the cooperation requirement. And so our enrollment in our voucher program went up about 18,000 children since May of last year. Now, the one thing I want you to understand, if you hear nothing else from me today, I want you to understand that every one of those children who receives a voucher represents a parent who is either actively in the workforce, working 25 hours a week, or actively increasing, improving his or her skill set in order to get into the workforce when he or she finishes that educational program that he or she is involved in. We also offer across the state resource and referral centers for the child care providers that we serve. We partner with about 13, 14, what's the number today, Chad, providers? I mean, the total number of child care providers. 1,112. Okay. So we partner with about 1,200 child care providers around the state. And one of the things you may not know is that during COVID, approximately 70% of child care providers actually closed their doors. They just couldn't stay open. Folks were not at work. Schools were closed. Folks who weren't working couldn't afford to keep their children in child care. And so we actually raised up a child care initiative during COVID to help some of those providers get back in business. And then as we realized that COVID was not going to be a 2-month or 3-month event, we at MDHS were the beneficiaries of CRSA funding and CARES Act funding and ARPA funding to help get child care providers back to work. In 2022, I appointed a child care expansion advisory committee within the agency. It was intended to focus on 2 issues, really. That's expanding child care capacity so that we could get more child care providers into the business of child care, and then expanding child care quality. And we received a good bit of ARPA funding to go along with the ideas we had already been working on with child care expansion. So we did some direct incentives to teachers who are part of our child care payment program. We also did some scholarships to allow employees in the child care business to go get some higher education in child development so that they would be better child care workers. And then we created what, as far as I know, is the first of its kind in the country. We created a substitute teacher program. One of the biggest issues child care providers face every day is making sure everybody who is supposed to be there caring for a classroom, caring for a group of children, is actually there. And so this substitute teacher program, we partnered with a group you may have heard of called Wonder School. They created a registry basically where people who are interested in working in childcare can put their name on the registry, and providers who have a vacancy, a need on any given day can tap into the registry and get a worker supplied to them. It allows childcare providers, whether they're home-based or whether they're institutional-based in the sense that they're a childcare center, to remain fully operational each day. And you see the amount we put into each of those. We put 83 million into direct incentives, 3 million into the scholarship program, and another 3 million into the teacher substitute teacher program. Just to show you the trend of our enrollment in our child care payment program, this is what it looked like, 27,925 back in July of last year. And the most recent numbers for this month, we have 35,861 vouchers. Now, when we come before you in the session next January, you're going to hear me asking for more money for the child care program, because we will hit a wall in December. Is that right? We're basically going to run out of money. To stay at this level of enrollment, we will have to have an infusion of additional cash from the state, or I don't see any indication that the feds are going to raise there's a formula that determines the 121 million that we get every year. I don't see that formula changing, so our federal funding will stay at about that same level. And if we're going to continue to serve those 36,000 children, we're going to be asking you to provide us with some additional general fund revenue to be able to do that. All right, I want to show you a little bit about what the biggest problem with childcare across the state. And I think everybody in the workforce business looking at how to get people in the workforce would agree that childcare is a non-negotiable part of that equation. If families don't have childcare, they can't really make serious decisions about getting engaged in the workforce. So this shows you basically counties with the highest number of childcare providers, the capacity, and then the ones that with the lowest. We have 4 counties in Mississippi. You see them on this chart. Admit, Benton, Franklin, and Nisqually. They don't have a single child care center, not one. And then you see several counties. Choctaw County has 1 child care center that can accommodate 30 children. Sharkey, Perry. One of the things you'll notice about the list from Admit down to Perry, those are some of our poorest counties. So it makes sense. They don't have child care providers. They're some of the poorest counties. But Carroll County only has 2. Greene County, Hinds County, you see, has the largest number of child care centers, 177 child care centers that can accommodate almost 14,000 children. Capacity across the state is the biggest problem we face with childcare, and employers locating new plants, looking to hire new employees. They have to keep these numbers in mind. They have to keep these numbers in mind, because all of the employees that they're looking to hire, if they have children, they're facing this issue. They're facing the reality of having or not having childcare. This next slide just kind of shows you in a little different way the number of child care centers by county, the ratio of child care centers by county. And for example, you see Tippah County has 5 children needing a childcare seat, basically, a place in a childcare facility for every seat that's available. So there's a lack of capacity there. Franklin County has 429 children that need a childcare option, but there's not one in the whole county. Benton County, 284. The Mid County has 650 children who need a childcare option, but there's not a childcare provider in that county. And that is a problem. Now, the other thing that kind of coalesces with that is, if you might imagine, in these poorer counties, transportation is an issue as well. And so maybe there's a job, if you're in Franklin County, maybe there's a job in Washington County or another county further north, maybe Lincoln County or Rankin County. But getting there from day to day is also a problem for families that are living in poverty. So the challenges that we face, challenges that we at MDHS face every day with trying to get people into the workforce is obviously this notion of job deserts. Just as there are childcare deserts, there are counties that don't have any childcare providers. There are counties that just simply don't have any jobs. Now, we work and we collaborate with the Department of Employment Security. They are our casework partners, so to speak. We work through the WIN job centers, but there are a lot of counties where they just simply don't have anywhere to refer somebody to. And some towns, like I say, don't have any jobs, and the jobs that are most accessible may be 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour away. And if you have an old car or no car, it's going to be pretty tough to get to that job each and every day. Workforce partnerships is a challenge that we face. We have federal funding. Our SNAP employment and training program has a 50-50 approach where we will pay half of the cost of training an employee, but we've got to have an employer willing to invest the other half and to partner with us. And right now, we struggle every month to find partners. We have two fantastic partners. You have in your packet, you have a sheet about Refill Jackson Initiative, and then you have a sheet about Hines Community College. They are our two best partners in terms of preparing people to get to work. Refill Jackson teaches a lot of soft skills. I think you may have heard about them if you were at the Horizon conference. I think Refill had somebody there. Refill is a wonderful success. My disappointment is that we don't have 50 or 100 more Refill Jackson initiatives all across the state that are teaching people what it's like to dress for an interview, to participate in an interview, to show up for work every day, to understand what it's like to have a job and to be at work 5 days a week. Some of the crazy stories I hear is we place people in their first job and they work for a week, and then they come back to their caseworker and they say things like, I didn't know I was going to have to show up every day. 5 days a week, they wanted me to show up. And this is something, if you've never been in the workforce, obviously, that's a rude awakening, but it's the reality of having a job means being available and being at the job and on the job and available to be at work each and every day. Refill teaches folks those basic tenets about what it means to be an employee. Hines Community College has a plethora of training opportunities for folks to get ready, to get trained, to get into the workforce. And if we had another, I wish, I don't want to beat up on the community colleges, but I wish the rest of the community colleges across the state would partner with us like Hines Community College. And before you ask, yes, we have approached them. Yes, we have had conversations with all of the community colleges, and we just have not had other community colleges sign up to partner with us like Hines Community College does. Childcare funding, I already mentioned, we're going to have some serious childcare needs come January 1st. And then I mentioned already this notion of childcare deserts. Another issue I would bring to your attention, because with plants operating 3 shifts, there's this reality of non-traditional childcare. And we don't have much of it. What do we have? Maybe 2 in the state? 2 childcare providers that are offering childcare after 6 o'clock in the evening. Well, what if your shift is 3 to 11? What do you do with your children? You can't leave them at home. Well, you could. A lot of parents do. It's not a smart thing. It's not a safe thing. And so we have been looking at some ways, trying to develop some incentives to get employers to partner with us to offer non-traditional childcare services to their employees. I will tell you, unfortunately, our experience has been not too many employers want to be in the childcare business. It's a reality that they know they need childcare options for their employees, but offering childcare, which in my view, if it were viewed like the healthcare benefit that we all recognize, everybody needs access to healthcare. If we looked at childcare as a benefit that employers could offer employees, maybe we could encourage more of them to partner with us in the childcare field. And then there's this business of eligibility stopping once a person hits the eligibility threshold, the idea of benefit cliffs. You know, we spend all our time and effort finding a job for somebody. They get a job at, say, $12 an hour. Now they've made themselves ineligible for SNAP and TANF benefits. They lose all of those public assistance benefits, and they're in worse shape than they were before they got the job. But that's the reality of what happens to a lot of the families that we serve. We can't find them jobs, can't enter the workforce. And I was amazed. I have a nephew who finished an engineering degree at Ole Miss recently, and he entered his first job as an engineer at Ingalls down on the coast at almost $50,000 a year. And I thought, wow, I didn't even get my first lawyer job out of law school was not $50,000 a year. And the reality is most of the folks that we're helping prepare to get into the workforce, they're looking at $25,000, maybe $30,000 a year. And it's a reality that they're going to hit that cliff once we get them into the workforce. So that's kind of an overview of what we do. Certainly a summary of some of the challenges we face. I think I've left enough time, Mr. Chairman. Happy to entertain questions at this point.
Thank you. I appreciate you covering that, and I appreciate you putting it in a digestible format so that we can understand. Because again, I don't want to use maybe the wrong term, but wraparound services to a certain degree. If we're trying to get people into the workforce, it's a combination of education, barriers, transportation, childcare, and you've touched on several of those. And we may not have all the answers, but we are certainly hearing that across the board. I guess concern with how we fund things, and I appreciate each of the agencies talking about the amount of federal money, and yours being less than 5% of state funds. I understand that you have to work with guidelines, and in 96, I think was the major overhaul where we ended up with TANF block grants, and the federal government sets the parameters, which includes promoting 2-parent families and things of that nature. So this is not something that's coming from, state government. This is actually where 96% of the money comes from. Not only do I think it's good to promote those things and that it would be beneficial to people to grow up in those environments, and I think the data supports good results, but I just want to make clear that's a mandate from where we get 96% of our money. Correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
As we move into a couple of the programs, I do want to ask a clarification question. I think I know the answer on this, but it has nothing to do really with workforce participation. But $837 million of SNAP benefits, that is for money spent in a grocery store or some approved recipient that could take SNAP. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right.
That's basically money that went into the economy all across the state, primarily to buy groceries, for lack of a simpler explanation.
And you can only use those at approved vendors.
That's
They
right.
have to be a SNAP approved vendor.
That's right.
Once again, a
And
federal.
it's only meals that you take home and prepare. It's not, unless we have some exceptions during disaster where you can buy hot meals, but generally speaking, those are meals foodstuffs that you buy at the grocery store, you take home and prepare in the home.
That ties back to the Department of Ag's program to try to educate healthy eating. Grocery tax is not charged to SNAP beneficiaries. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. Now, I would have to confirm that with our program director, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I understand that to be correct. I don't think people realize that sometimes when they start talking about the grocery tax and the poorest of the poor among us. But if SNAP benefits are not taxed, I do think that's something that needs to be understood maybe for another day. With the block grant, with TANF, I would like to see some historical data as it relates. And I realize you haven't been there and you inherited a whirlwind, but we do need to know what we're doing, how impactful it is to see this ramp up in childcare, because that's what I've heard repeatedly is the largest barrier. I think Senator Norwood mentioned it earlier, was surprised it was not number one really on the list, but I'm having trouble reconciling the cost of childcare with the pay of childcare workers and being told that economic principles just don't apply in the childcare sphere. What exactly is a voucher worth? Would you tell me a little bit, if I came and applied and I qualified, what kind of voucher do I have? How can I use it?
Well, actually, it goes to the childcare provider, and it is, we do a market survey every year. Is that right, Jeff? Every 3 years, we do a market survey of all of the childcare providers in the state and what it costs them to operate. And then we determine from that market survey what our vouchers should be, and they range, give me a monthly range.
So, for example, right now, full-time voucher.
Okay, so $150, $152 a week for an infant right now is what our voucher covers. And it's paid directly to the child care provider on behalf of that parent and that child.
A week.
A week.
All right. What about a non-infant?
What's the 3 to 5 year old?
Preschool ages.
$135 a week for a preschooler, 3 to 5 year old.
And have you entered into a contractual agreement where they'll accept that amount on the voucher, or is the family having to make up the difference if it's the rate is more expensive? Okay, so just for people that didn't hear that, I'm told that the child care provider can charge their own rate and just accept that 135, assuming their rate's $200. They got to come up with $65 somewhere else.
Right. It's sort of, I analogize it to what we ask healthcare providers to do if they accept Medicaid. They can accept the Medicaid rate and, that's what they get.
But that's not the case here.
Well, there is a sliding scale for what parents pay. Some childcare providers actually collect it. Some of them don't. Fair. Some of them don't ask for parents to pay that balance.
Okay, and then from the standpoint of the voucher program, is it time limited like TANF benefits?
It's not. We do an annual certification for that family. We look at their household income. They have to be below the 85% of the state median income at or below 85% of the state median income. If their income goes over that, they lose the ability to get a voucher any longer.
The 35,000 children, that represents individual vouchers, I assume is a child.
Yes,
I might receive 3 vouchers if I qualify, if I have 3 children.
right.
Okay.
Right. Those are individual vouchers at 35,000. Yes.
Do we have a backlog of people who have applied for the vouchers? Because you tell me we're up against a financial wall that we're not gonna be able to afford it.
Right.
Are we servicing everyone who qualifies that has applied?
We are at this time. That's why we have converted, how much, TANF, 15% this year?
20, I think you said 25 million earlier, maybe, of the TANF block
Right.
had been.
We are limited by federal law. We can convert up to 30% of our TANF grant to childcare costs. And we've only converted about 15 this year, 25 million. But no, there is no time limit on how long you can receive a voucher, as long as you meet the requirements that you're employed 25 hours or more, or you're in an educational program and your income doesn't exceed 85% of the state median income. That right now is about $38,000 a year for a family of 3, right? I think that's the number.
So I guess my question would be, if we only have 1,500 to 1,800 people currently enrolled in TANF, how do we have 35,000 children? In other words, we meet the criteria, the work requirement, because you mentioned we only had 1,500 to 1,800 people enrolled in TANF, and that would be me as an adult receiving whatever services.
Right.
And you stated that that's a low, or you didn't state, but I felt like you felt that was a low number. What's the barrier to people actually being enrolled in TANF separate and apart from the child care? Because it's the same qualification, is it not?
Well, you can be a working poor family, not eligible for TANF, and still qualify for a child care voucher. You don't have to be TANF eligible to get a child care voucher.
But you do have to have the work requirement.
Yes.
Okay. And you have the same median income cap, 85%?
Not for TANF. The income level for TANF right now is about 50% of the poverty level.
Okay. So, to continue the program, do you have any idea financially what that looks like?
We have estimated about 16 to 20 million is the additional funding we will need to continue to serve the needs that we anticipate, we're going to be facing into the new year.
We are required to raise our 75%. Fairly significant.
But as I understand it, we're serving every qualified applicant at this time, and to serve them going forward, 16 to 18 million more dollars plus whatever adjustment might be for increases. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
don't mean to interrupt you, but we couldn't hear. Could you either repeat it or?
I apologize. My understanding was it was 16 to 18 million dollars of additional funds to serve it as it is today. That's without an increase, but the expectation in October is that they will verify the numbers, and they expect them to go up, not down. So that number could be a little bit higher.
Man, is that payment or that's the participant?
It's the child care voucher.
Okay.
Yes. The cash assistance, switching gears, what amount is that a month? Is that based on some type of scale from the TANF side?
The statute sets it at $190 a month plus $36 for the first additional member and $24 for each additional family member. So for a family of 3, it's $260 a month. And then it adds $24 for each additional child in the household after that.
And is that set by federal statute or state?
No, that's set by the state. As you may recall, back in 2001, I came here and asked you to raise that rate about about $90 a month because we had not moved it since 1999, I believe. So we raised it $90 a month in 2022. We have since fallen behind most of our neighboring states. We moved slightly ahead of Louisiana and Arkansas with that change, but we're back at one of the lower TANF numbers.
And I will ask this question, I'll yield to the committee for questions. When you were calculating capacity, how did you calculate that? Is that by survey, or how did you calculate your child care centers information? And is that inclusive of the pre-K collaboratives, or do they have to be licensed child care facilities?
These are licensed either centers or home-based childcare. Our program deals with two kinds of providers, either centers that have been licensed, and the Department of Health does the licensure for them. We actually pay for it, but they do the licensure work. And then they're home-based childcare providers. We do not include the early childhood collaboratives because they're not eligible for our vouchers.
What about churches or other organizations such as that provide childcare? Would it be only if they were licensed?
If they get licensed, then they could participate in our program, but they have to go through the licensure with it's a health and safety inspection and everything that the Department of Health does to license them, and the staffing and everything else.
Thank you. I have questions from the committee. Senator Norwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, just a couple of questions. The food stamp, the dollar amount that food stamp recipients receive, that's set by the federal government?
That is correct. Yeah.
Now, and I guess, of late, we've complained a whole lot about the cost of food, and the population that's impacted the most, I would imagine, would be the elderly. Now, are there, and some of my elderly constituents, they only receive $10 to $12. Is that set by the federal government as well?
That is, and it really pains me. Most of them receive about $24 to $36 maximum, and that is set by federal law. And I routinely tell elderly participants, please contact all of our congressmen, remind them again, we need to raise those rates. Now, it's been at that level for years and years, but it is set by Congress.
Okay. And the money that goes into the Meals on Wheel and the congregate meals, now that is basically at the discretion, money coming from the federal government. And do we have other resources that can go on to that?
Well, we get a grant from the Office for Community Living under the Older Americans Act, and that's where that funding comes from. It's all federal money that comes directly to our Division of Aging and Adult Services. So it's a grant based on there's a formula based on the number of senior adults in a county that determines how much each of the planning and development districts each receive a portion of our state grant based on the population, their elderly population in their planning and development district.
Okay, and I guess all of this ties back into, if I have an elderly parent, I know that my elderly parent is going to be taken care of from food wise and so forth. It also eases the burden for me to take on full-time employment. Is that something that, and I'm bringing this up because I talked to some planning development districts, and they have extensive waiting lists for individuals that would qualify for these programs, but they don't have the funds. So is that, and I don't necessarily get into it, you can give me that later on, but it's something that I think that would be in the best interest of most of us to direct more money to serve that population.
Well, we direct every dollar that we get to the planning and development districts based on that formula, based on their elderly adult population. Now, we have to reallocate that, just like the population changes in, children, median age adults, the senior adult population changes. And we just reallocated that formula about a year ago. We got a lot of pushback from the planning and development districts, but that's what the law requires. The population determines how much each planning and development district's area agency on aging gets, and not us. We distribute it based solely on the formula. And we don't exclude anybody. I tell folks about our aging division. It has the simplest eligibility criteria of anything we administer. You have to be 60 years old and you have to be breathing, and that's it. That's what qualifies you for all of these programs. But I've not heard of people on a waiting list, Senator, but I'm certainly happy to discuss that with you, and I'll take it back to our nutrition director who administers our home delivered meals program.
And one last question, I think this session, we appropriated $9 million for the AOP program. Has that money been allocated to sub-grantees with human services?
Well, Senator, I recall having a conversation with you after our bill was signed. I don't know where that $9 million was, because I didn't find it in our appropriation. I didn't discern of $9 million in our appropriation bill for AOP.
I was out during the latter part of it, but I'll follow up with
Yes, sir.
on that, because that was something I think.
We will be asking for AOP money again. What we're going to do is, the appropriations chairman has told me 9 million may be a high number to start with. We're going to come back and ask for $1.5 million this year so that we can restart these community-based juvenile justice programs and prove to you what I believe every youth court judge would tell you, and that is community-based programs keep children from getting into the adult criminal justice system and winding up in our prison. We have to have community-based programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Anderson. You and I have had these talks for a few years here, and just want to kind of drill down on this, like always, is what is our current TANF balance that we have in your,
Yes, sir. For
under
the
your
years
management
that
right
we
now?
still have on hand, we have approximately 140 million, I believe.
Right, and through your work, you found a way to use a proportionate percentage of that towards some of these work programs and things like that to allow working adults to get childcare and that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, we're using it for childcare. We have a carve out also every year for CPS. So 29 million of it goes directly to CPS for child welfare purposes.
And what year did you start using that percentage for that? When did you start allocating
CPS?
this for the childcare vouchers?
Oh, last year was the first year we did that.
Okay, and so on the graph earlier where you showed the number of childcare vouchers, I believe it went back to over a 10-year period or so, and it showed the number ramping up to, I think, the 35,900 or so that you showed for maybe this year. If you've only been using those TANF dollars the last couple of years, and those numbers are going up, where was the funding for that coming before you allocated this percentage of TANF over to that program?
It was coming from the $120 million federal grant that we get.
Okay.
And we also got some ARPA discretionary money. And we took some ARPA discretionary money this year and put it with our federal grant so that we wouldn't have to ask you during this legislative year to give us some additional state funding. We took ARPA discretionary. We got $199 million in ARPA discretionary funds, some of which we use for these incentives and for the substitute teacher pool. We put discretionary ARPA fund into paying vouchers through the end of this year.
So again, I'm trying to, I think you understand where I'm coming on this. So if we just started 2 years ago using, this proportion amount of the TANF fund for for the childcare. And we did do that through, ARPA started in 2020. So what were we using before 2020 for the childcare vouchers?
That graph actually started July. Then the agency.
So we really didn't have a childcare voucher program before 2020?
No.
And what dollars we're paying for it?
I'm going to invite you up because
Come
you're
around.
sharing some extremely beneficial information and nobody's hearing it but us. So maybe just a quick recap on that so people can understand, because I think this is a very important question.
So about 10 years ago, which is what you referenced, the state did in fact have a waiting list for childcare vouchers. The state was using about 70% of its federal funding on direct childcare vouchers. Since then, the agency has allocated about 85%, which is about the max allowance that we can use of our federal dollars. We have to use 12% of our federal dollars on quality improvement, which is training. We do on-site technical assistance at childcare providers, et cetera. And then we use about 3% on administrative costs. So we are using 85% on direct services. That graph.
Were we able to use TANF dollars for childcare vouchers before 2020 ARPA dollars?
Yes, yes.
And so what's the difference that happened 2 years ago?
I think we got new leadership at the agency.
Okay, so, but that percentage that we've talked about, because one of my concerns has been, we have over $100 million in TANF dollars that are out there, and I know I've talked to the director about this extensively. As my concern is that, we need to use those funds properly and get them to the people who need them. And I know we have the federal, kind of road bumps and speed bumps, the 4 different ways that they can be used that we've talked about. But I also know that yesterday there were federal hearings. I assume some of that would be on how dollars could or should be spent. If we were to be speaking to our U.S. senators or our representatives about TANF dollars, I would assume you would not be in favor of us saying, stop sending the money. I assume you would be in favor of us increasing the ability for you to access it in the proper way. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes, because we're only allowed up to 30% of TANF transfer for child care vouchers. If we could use a higher percentage of TANF dollars, I think we could absolutely put that money to work with child care.
And beyond that, those dollars, there's not a real easy way to access those dollars for other things. If we, you've given some good examples. You mentioned transportation earlier. An ability to access those dollars to help someone, get transportation, to a job, to get back into the workforce. That's not a provision right now that's allowed under the TANF regulations, correct?
No, it is allowed. One of the things we're looking at, for example, I'll give you West Virginia's experience. They commit about $2 million in TANF money every year to rehabbing vehicles for their TANF families. They invest $6,000 in, it's 1.2 million. They invest $6,000 in a vehicle to get it fully road ready, and then they give it to a TANF family, and they're investing 1.2 million. We're looking for a partner right now to start a program like that in Mississippi. We thought we had a partner down in South Mississippi, and a welding program came along and we lost our partner. So
you are looking at ways to use some of that money for more creative ways. And, to that point,
absolutely,
you might have some type of bus or some type of transportation, from an underpopulated area into a more populated area to get the employee. But, what other things have you come up with, or what are you giving consideration to creatively to try to get able-bodied workers to their job, which is, I think, the whole point of the chairman's
Well, you mentioned earlier.
study here is how do we get these people to participate in the workforce?
Right. Well, one of the things we're talking about is trying to partner with, for example, those early learning academies, early learning collaboratives, and use them as a use our childcare providers as a pipeline for creating teachers to move into the teacher population shortage that we have. Letting childcare be a proving ground basically for potential new teachers. That's one of the ideas we're looking at.
Could you provide the chairman a list of things that would be helpful for us to suggest to our federal colleagues as additional provisions for TANF dollar use? Because I know you've told me also before that if the fund balance gets to a certain level, there is a potential that some of that reverts back to the federal government.
Well, we have generally 3 fiscal years to allocate it, and we generally meet that 3 fiscal year requirement.
But we could, but that could happen if we don't find.
It could, but I don't foresee it in the near future, but it could happen.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any follow-up on that? Because I do think that would be a key piece of information of what we could get here, of how to find use of those dollars while the feds are looking at this issue. I think would be a great way to help you move that percentage rate.
I would love to hear any suggestions that the agency has of how they could utilize the funds.
Sure.
And again, unfortunately, we don't get to vote on some of those things, but we can at least share that with our colleagues at the federal level.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll say just briefly, the hearings yesterday focused mainly on non-cash assistance and the way those funds are being used, not the basic cash assistance benefit. That was not part of the hearings on the Hill yesterday. But I'll get the ideas that we're looking at to you. I have a deputy whose title is Chief Innovation Officer, and that is her job, is to come up with what's the next new thing for this agency to be doing. So I'll get those to you.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Simmons, Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Anderson. My question was about the child care payment program. And you said that the payment goes directly to the child care centers, correct?
That's correct.
And the actual mothers, my concern, and then I have a question. My concern is that a lot of the mothers are single moms and they are stuck. The ones who are in fact working are stuck in low wage jobs, and childcare is so unaffordable. Have you heard anything about this earn and learn model out there where stipends, I guess if we can write it in the state plan, where stipends could be provided to those single moms to assist them? I mean, certainly considering the fact that they are in fact working or pursuing some kind of educational training.
Well, we're always looking for ways, and a couple of ideas that we are looking at right now is ways, I think the phrase that's in parlance right now is to upskill workers. We are looking for ways to do that with our TANF population in order to bring them out of, a job is great, but if it's minimum wage job and you've got children in childcare, there's not anything left at the end of the day. You and I both know that. So.
And of course, I share the goal that, economic security should be what we are striving for these moms. And I just hear from a lot of them who basically said that even the amounts that you listed as the actual voucher amount, it's just not enough for childcare, but they are still working, meeting that 25-hour requirement, or they actually pursuing some kind of skills or education. And so I guess I'm concerned for that mother who wants a better paying job, wants to not only pursue other skills and training, but try to go to school as well as work, but still need the assistance with the program. What, if anything, we can do for her? If you all will look at that and come up with some creative strategies, I'd love to hear your suggestions regarding that.
I'll share those along with other ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Anderson. You spoke about, and I guess maybe an innovation officer at your office. And you mentioned earlier a father program.
Fatherhood Initiative? Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
and I think you referenced 4 pilot programs. Where are those currently implemented?
They just started about a couple months ago, Hines County and Madison. I'm not sure. I don't have my child support division director here, but I think Hines and Madison are 2 of the counties. I'm not sure the other 2 at this point. But we're anticipating, if we get approval from our federal partner, to take that program statewide.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions from the committee? Director, thank you. I'm sorry we ran a little long, but I think that's very valuable information, and I appreciate you and your team being here. We will move forward in just a second, and I will see Rebecca stepping back in, I think, shortly, but she will present Empower. We've transitioned from agency into folks that have put their resources toward trying to assist government in addressing our workforce participation issues. And I'll be honest, as I began to search for information, there's not a lot of study on it. There's difficulty, I think, partly, and I'm rehashing a little what I said earlier, but it's the Bureau of Labor and Statistics model. The data that's used, even MDHS is trying to use different information to try to get a clearer picture. So it's hard to find information that clearly explains things. Well, Empower, and we appreciate their work. I know Mr. Callan is here, and appreciate that, and Mr. Thigpen. But Rebecca Staples is presenting today, and Rebecca and I have talked a lot in the last year about this subject matter. So when they looked to see what research was out there, they didn't find much. So they did what we needed to do. They went out and created it. So Rebecca, I will give you the floor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Y'all would know the minute I go to the ladies' room, it's time for me to speak. So sorry for the delay. All right. As the chair said, my name is Rebecca Staples. I am the president and founder of Free State Strategies, a consulting firm, but I'm here today in my capacity as a work fellow for Empower Mississippi. And as Chairman Sparks said, Empower just released an interim report on labor force. And so this is the title page. It's called "Why Aren't More Mississippians Working?" This was released hot off the press last month. A little bit about Empower. Many of you are familiar, I hope. It's a nonprofit organization founded 10 years ago. Empower is focused on 3 pillars: education, justice, and work. And I'm noting for you all, as you've heard today, all 3 of those impact labor force in significant ways. And I want to give a shout out to my fellow Jones Countyan who is in the room. Grant Callan is the CEO of Empower. So I always like to bring all roads home to Jones County. So, hey, Grant. So, as Chairman Sparks said, Empower began looking at labor force and observed that there wasn't, that we could find a baseline aggregate document that highlighted what's going on in labor force participation in Mississippi. And so they decided to take an approach to study this information, but there were 3 key factors that I think really are important to note. So I'm noting them here. First, let the data lead. Recommendations and policy analysis is only worth its salt if you have integrity of data and data collection. So we've got to let the data, what do the numbers say? Secondly, no preconceived notions. We didn't want to go into this saying we think X, Y, or Z. We don't need to have a solution, then find the data that supports that outcome. And so we wanted to say no preconceived notions. And thirdly, as you've heard today, context matters. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we wanted to ensure that we had Mississippi context, because we're talking about policy solutions for Mississippi. Who are the folks that know it best? people that live here. So a little bit about the state's economic landscape. You guys know this better than I do, but Mississippi's economy is growing. We are talking about labor force, but I want to acknowledge where I think the economy is right now. Pro-growth economic policies that you all have in large part passed in recent years are producing results. So a few things, lowest ever unemployment rates. Actually, I was at an event yesterday where I heard the governor talk about some really interesting data. So I wanted to share it with you all. Mississippi's unemployment rate is 2.7%, and it's dropped 54% below 2019 levels. So I think that's really positive. Secondly, private sector capital investment, record investment in Mississippi. Y'all have voted on major economic development projects. Again, you know it better than I do. $15 billion of investment, the single largest economic development project, the single largest payroll project, 130 million. That's wonderful, shows a lot of momentum. And then recently, Lieutenant Governor Hosemann noted that Mississippi has paid off about $1.2 billion in debt and noted a very strong and healthy balance in the state's rainy day fund, north of 700 million. So these are really, really wonderful sort of pegs in the Mississippi economic landscape. But while we're talking about positive momentum, I think we need to also note some things that might be a few chinks in our armor. The labor force challenge, Mississippi typically lags the nation and the region in terms of the number of people who are looking for work and or unemployed, are already working. This is called, you've heard it a million times today, the labor force participation rate. All right, it's very wonky, but you're gonna hear me say it a lot. The federal government has come up with this term, you know, no wonks like the feds. Mississippi's average monthly rate for 2023 is 53.9%. It's the lowest in the US, and the national rate for that same year is 62.7%. Among prime working age, so this is 25 to 54, although I want to note my slide says 64, that's a typo. Adults age 25 to 54 in 2023, the labor force rate was 70.3% in Mississippi. For that same rate at the national level, it was 79%. So we're lagging the national rates. Our rate has been among the lowest since the Bureau of Labor Statistics has started collecting this data in 1976, the late 70s, and it's never risen above 43rd. Okay. Lieutenant Governor Hosemann recently, I believe this was in his speech at Neshoba County Fair, he noted that the state's labor force participation rate is the drag on our economy. And I thought that was a really good way to frame this, because it really does reflect what a lot of academic researchers have found, whether that's the Congressional Budget Office, the Federal Reserve, other sort of nonpartisan, well-regarded think tanks, academic institutions have connected low labor force participation rates with higher tax rates, more government dependency. It kind of makes sense though. If you have fewer people working, there might be an additional need for government benefits and services to fund that. You might need to bring in more revenue. So that means you're going to have higher tax rates. So as we think about labor force participation, and to Chairman Sparks' note earlier about silos, it's not a simple, here's a problem, there's a solution. There's so many factors. So when we think about labor force and you hear Governor Hosemann say it's the drag on our economy, there's a lot of logic in that. So what's being measured? We have heard a lot today about charts, data. I'll try not to bore y'all, but no promises. The labor force, number of people who are employed and or looking for work. So that is the labor force. The unemployment rate is essentially your labor force who is looking for work, not working, divided by your working age population. Again, this does not reflect the number of folks who are on the sidelines, as they say, so neither looking for work or employed. And then the labor force participation rate, labor force divided by total working age population. I will note the federal government defines the civilian institutional population. So if you are in the military, a nursing home, a correctional facility, you are not included within the labor force. You are considered an institutional population. A few notes. Noticed Dr. Ashley earlier appreciated his presentation. And so I won't rehash a lot of that, but he talked about the American Community Survey and the current population survey. So just a few additional notes on that. So when we talk labor force, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the defining federal entity, you must be 16 years or over. So your minimum threshold for being in the labor force is age 16, but there is no upper limit. And that'll be important later when we talk about different populations and their participation. Dr. Ashley mentioned the American Community Survey. And as he said, that is a yearly survey. That's good information for like granular. A lot of times you'll see policy wonks or academics or whomever use ACS data for a county, a township, so you can get at that granular level. What I find primarily when we have discussions about labor force participation, unemployment rate, the local area unemployment statistics, which is a program the BLS conducts in consultation with state workforce agencies, that tends to use current population survey information from the Census Bureau, but it's the same information that you would use for the labor force participation rate, the unemployment rate, the employment rate. So that's where you get that. And when you see news articles and headlines, that's typically the CPS monthly data. Okay. Why does labor force participation rate matter? Again, it's kind of a mouthful to say. So why are we even talking about this? It's a measure of labor market health. Essentially, do we have enough people in the labor market to produce goods and services? So we can kind of back into what's the economy doing? How healthy is our economy? A falling participation rate tends to mean more people are either unwilling or unable to work. We talked earlier, low labor force tends to be correlated with reduced GDP, higher tax rates, more dependence. Dr. Corey Miller, the state economist, I think he spoke to y'all earlier this year. I believe that was in January, and he mentioned that if the Mississippi labor force rate had mirrored the US rate for 2022, inflation adjusted GDP would have been 10% larger, and the state's labor force would be 13% larger. So if we just mirrored the US rate, there'd be significant bumps. And then a note about President Trump's and Congress's Tax Cut and Jobs Act from 2017. I was really happy to see the Mississippi legislature codify some permanent changes to the tax code that reflect the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And the reason why I was happy to see that, because analysis conducted by the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia shows that the reason the TCJA, Tax Cut and Jobs Act, was significant to stimulate the economy is because it produced a 1.5% point increase in the labor force rate. And they said that was more impactful than the lower tax rates increasing consumer spending. So put simply, getting more folks into the labor market was one of the primary reasons this tax cut policy was working according to the Federal Reserve. But I do want to take a step back even further. So we're talking about labor force, claims, eligibility, but I really liked how Chairman Sparks started this, and he says, we can, I'm paraphrasing, we can manipulate data and numbers, but at the end of the day, we want to help people find work. And one of the reasons I think work is so important, this is getting a little, just you're hearing some of my personal philosophy. Data also supports this. Working people tend to be happier. They're happier, they're more productive. Work generates what Arthur Brooks, he's I would call him a policy wonk. I'm a bit of a fan of Arthur Brooks, writer, public figure. He thinks a lot about work, happiness, community fabric. He calls work an avenue for earned success. And what he means by that is it can help lead to self-worth, dignity, confidence, and often purpose. So if you have earned success, you feel, hey, I did this. So you're building your confidence and your resiliency. And he thinks that's part of a meaningful American fabric. And then finally, I wanted to note that I think in my mind, as I think about mental health, as I think about some of our societal issues, and I appreciate Senator Parker's work on the Youth Mental Health Task Force, purpose and achievement are really critical to issues like isolation, loneliness, depression. If you're engaged in purpose, you feel that your life has meaning, you're working oftentimes with others. And so from a big picture standpoint, I also believe work is a God-given opportunity. And so I just want to say, I appreciate the policymakers valuing work and having these conversations, because I think it's really part of the Mississippi fabric and the American fabric. All right, so a few more things that y'all are gonna know more than me, but again, I think we gotta give credit where credit is due. Y'all have taken a lot of recent steps that I think are already improving and producing results. A few of those, statewide career coaches. I see Dr. Taylor in the audience here. I know Accelerate Mississippi has done a great job rolling out career coaches. I think in the 2023-2024 school year, career coaches were in about 79% of high schools. I think that's transformational change. If you are connecting with young people, which we'll see later is really important, that's gonna have, that's gonna pay off in dividends. Historic tax cuts on individuals and businesses, investments in site development, economic development. Y'all have done a lot of work to provide regulatory relief. I also note that the Secretary of State's office has to tackle the TAPE initiative. And then of course, improved educational attainment, which is so correlated to labor force participation, and remain very ecstatic over the nation talking about the Mississippi Miracle and the reading improvement. So great job. Let's keep it going. All right. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of this report. Who did it? What are the summary findings? So Empower Mississippi, to look at this issue, commissioned NSPARC, which is the National Strategic Planning and Analysis Research Center at Mississippi State, to do a baseline study from an academic standpoint. They evaluated the state's labor force participation rate, and they studied age, education level, race, gender, looking at about a 13-year time period, 2010 through 2023. And the reason they captured this is so it would have the aftermath of the Great Recession, impacts of COVID. So when you think about seasonal adjustments, which often happen, and wonky Bureau of Labor Statistics data, this will give us a clearer picture. I also want to note two things for y'all, and you have, I think, a copy of the report. I'm only going to talk about in the presentation right now our high-level findings, but NSPARC did more than look at these 4 factors. They also looked, and you'll see at the very end of this, they looked at job postings by ecosystem under the Accelerate model and local workforce areas. They looked at unbaked data, who has a checking account, who has a savings account, contiguous counties and states that have high labor force, what their demography looks like, and then turnover rates. So some of that is not in my prepared remarks, but it's a treasure chest of information. The other thing I'll note about NSPARC, as this is a labor force committee, NSPARC is statutorily designated by the legislature as the state's data clearinghouse. And they collect the information that is used in Mississippi's state longitudinal data system. So they have this information already within their normal course of business. Summary results. Okay, we're getting to the meat and potatoes. In short, the Mississippi labor force participation rate has been the lowest or near the lowest since the BLS started capturing this data. Again, just to reiterate, the 2023 average monthly rate, 53.9%. The US rate for that same time period, 62.7%. And so what does that mean? That means about nearly half of Mississippi's civilian, non-institutionalized population, 46%, aren't in the labor force. That's about 37% nationally. So you see we're lagging behind. Okay, I do have a few charts, not too many. Just big picture, I wanted y'all to get an idea of kind of the trend line. So the charts, don't worry about reading it, but you see the direction. In general, it's a downward trend with some bumps, but I thought this would be a very interesting visual for y'all. Okay, let's break it down by some of the factors. So summary results for age. The population most likely to be in the labor force, and this makes sense, are in the 25 to 44 and 45 to 64 age range. That makes sense because that covers what the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls like the prime age working population, which is that 25 to 54. We divided it into these different BLS groups, but just so you know, the ages 25 to 44, they participate in the labor force at about 78.9%, 45 to 64, 61.7%. And I remind you the average is 53.9. The lowest participation is in the age group 65 or older. That makes sense given retirement age implications. And then the age group 16 through 24, the youth, as I'll call them, participate at a rate of 43.6%. But I want to highlight that group because they've seen the greatest decline over the time period of participation. So they're down about 6% from 2010. And here's why I think that's critical. It's the largest decline. We're seeing it not only in Mississippi, but nationally, age 16 through 24 tend to be working at lower rates than previous eras and decades. You know, I think when we talk about the culture of work, if you miss out on what I'm considering to be a really foundational, fundamental period of learning how to be in the workforce, that's going to have some long-term implications. So when I was thinking about preparing for today, I was doing some research about youth employment, and it, you know, data suggests if you are working between this age group, 16 to 24, you're learning how to succeed or fail, build resilience, get knocked down off your feet. When I turned 15, and I want y'all to think about when was your first job? Like how old were you when you first started working? So I grew up in Laurel, free state of Jones. I turned 15, I went to McAllister's, I put in my application, and I got hired. And so the reason I did that was because I wanted to buy a car. And my parents said, we're not buying one for you. You can go make some money. So I was able to work in high school. I took out a loan. I paid a car note. I paid insurance with this part-time job. And it did teach me a lot about customer service. I had to talk to adults, I had to talk to teenagers, children. I had to learn to work with difficult people, which came in handy later when I spent many years here at the state capitol. No, I'm kidding. But I highlight that because if we are losing this sort of foundational culture of work, that is, as we're seeing in the data, having long-term implications for labor force participation. And then you see kind of the age 65 and over is the very bottom line. The next one is the 16 through 24. So it just starts kind of lower than we'd want it to, even despite the decline. All right, next up, education. I think this is a really important slide. The more education you have, the more likely you are to be in the labor force. By the numbers, if you have an associate's degree right now in Mississippi, you're participating in the labor force a little over 68%. That's fantastic relative to the average, which is 53.9%. If you have a bachelor's degree, you participate 66.7%. Some college without a degree, 54.4%. If you have a GED or a high school diploma, you're participating about 51%. And then if you have no GED or high school diploma, your participation level is under 30%, it's 29.1. I wanna note that the trajectory of Mississippi trends, more people with higher education are seeing their population increase, according to this data. So long-term, that should lead to an uptick in the labor force rates. I think that's really positive. And then this next slide, you see the very top associates all the way down to less than high school. So sort of a sliding scale of participation. Summary results on race. Non-Hispanic, Black, and white populations had similar levels of labor force participation. Non-Hispanic, Black populations participate at 54%, non-Hispanic white, 53%. Hispanic individuals participated at much higher than average rates at about 62%. A few notes on race. Hispanic individuals constitute a small portion of the labor force, and they've had the most participation decline. However, they have had tremendous population growth, 162%. So trends suggest that Hispanic individuals will continue entering the labor market more every year. The labor force participation decline for non-Hispanic white populations by 6.5%. That decline for non-Hispanic Black populations was 1.9%. A few other notes that I think is interesting context. Non-Hispanic Black population saw growth in its working age population by about 9% over the time period. And the non-Hispanic white saw a decline in that population of about 3.5%. So just wanted to note that context. And then the next slide is a chart. It's kind of messy, hard to see that one, but I wanted y'all to see kind of Hispanic, other race, non-Hispanic, Black, non-Hispanic, white. There we go. Summary results for gender. Despite Mississippi having more females in the population than males, males participated in the labor force at a higher rate than females. Men, 59.8%, women, 48.5%. So there's a pretty large gap. There are more working age females, which should lead to higher participation rates for women, but I'm not sure you see that in the data. Both rates for men and women fell by about 5% over the time period. And then the levels of growth, because NSPARC did adjust for population context. Males saw population increase by about 4%, women by about 2.5%. So I know there's been conversation today about men and women. There is a gap according to this information. And then you see this is the male on top, female on bottom. It's just interesting to see where they diverge and align in terms of trend line. This next slide, InSpark put together a really cool regression analysis. That is a statistical technique that I'll sort of try to put it in my terms, that tells you how relevant a factor is in terms of predicting a certain outcome. So this should be interpreted carefully, as only 4 factors were tested: age, race, gender, and educational attainment in alignment with the study. However, there are many other factors that can impact labor force participation. But I pulled out a few that I wanted to highlight. Education was found to be the #1 most statistically relevant factor impacting labor force participation of the metrics we studied. So, compared to someone with a high school diploma, here's how educational attainment impacts the likelihood that you'll be in the labor force. A bachelor's degree means you're 129.5% more likely to be in the labor force. Wow, 129. Associate's degree, 77.6% more likely. Some college, no degree, you're over 20% more likely. And then less than a high school diploma, that is not a neutral metric. You are about 61% less likely to be in the labor force if you have less than a high school diploma. So I note this, interpret the information carefully, but you see that education is very correlated with labor force participation. In case you're curious, I'll just rank real quickly the other factors. So education was the most relevant. Second most important was age. Third most important was gender. Fourth most important was race. Okay, so I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to have a quantitative focus as well as qualitative. And so to accomplish the quantitative, InSpark at Mississippi State was commissioned to do the academic quantitative findings and research. For qualitative, that's where the local context and the Mississippi voices came in. So I'll tell you a little bit in this single slide. Again, numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Local context matters. So in that vein, we were able to conduct stakeholder interviews with many organizations, individuals, from the state economist to the Federal Reserve, to private citizens, to economic development organizations across the state, because we wanted to better understand what's happening in your local labor market. What is the anecdotal information? If we are trusting data from a government source, is that what job creators are seeing? So we got really good anecdotal information. From that, we did pull some feedback, and it appears that there's some universal agreement that additional study is needed in factors like gender and racial gaps, veteran analysis. There is some veteran analysis in this report as well. Wage analysis. I'll note that Mississippi is the lowest cost of living in America. What, if at all, impact does that have in labor force participation? We also talked about benchmarking against Southeastern states, and then looking more intentionally at regulatory burdens. And then I want to note, because I think this has come up several times today, from our stakeholder interviews and our own research, I think there is underlying concern about what is the data collection methodology? What is this information? Does it capture the economic activity that we think it should? Because if we're gonna, the state's going to be serious about changing policies or adopting laws, you need to make sure the information you're using is actually reflecting what's going on in the market. All right, only a couple more slides and I'll be done. I did want to just give you a snapshot of what's happening in 2024. So our study ended at 2023. I think this is, while 4 months do not a trend make, the labor force participation rate is on an uptick. So you'll see we started out at 53.8 December 2023. So from that, we're now at 54.4% in August 2024. So I think that is a good sign, we hope. And then final slide, what's next for Empower? Again, this is an interim report. We want to hear from you. We wanted to look at the data, figure out what's a baseline of information, what's actually going on, because we did not feel it was it would be worth our salt to make policy recommendations without actually getting a handle on what's happening. We'd like to keep studying this. I'll put in a plug. We would love to know what you guys think should be studied. There will be a version 2, report number 2. And so we'd love feedback on how we can augment your work here. And so we have an email address set up, research@empowerms.org. So questions, comments, feedback, ideas, job opportunities, send it to us. And so, yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is my prepared presentation. I hope I didn't talk too long, so I'd be happy to take any questions. And I know y'all have both the slide deck and the report in front of you.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting together the presentation, of course, to Empower for actually doing the work and committed to continue to do the work. And it's been one of their major tenets from day one is work. Just simply the dignity, the value, all of the things that you mentioned. And I don't think anybody disagrees on that. I think the barriers that are there, a lot of times we also agree, and that's why we started with the agencies to say, what as a state can we do, the investment, the ROI, if you will. And I think we've committed a lot of money to career coaches. We've committed a lot of money to that investment. And then I hear rehab services talking about, just since 15, 16, whenever he said the WIOA law changed, focusing on populations with disabilities. Well, that definition is broad. If you've got an IEP, if there's, autism, dyslexia, all the different things that potentially matriculate after high school to a job. We weren't targeted to a job. And then I think you're not really happy with that job. It's not a great paying job, and it's not what you were interested in. So I do believe the state is investing, and I appreciate the shout out, but I do believe that there's been moves made, particularly getting the SWIB board in the position it's in, creating Accelerate. Chairman Parker, of course, chaired the Workforce and Economic Development Committee along with Chairman Bell, and all that was done. I'd be remiss, she may not be in the room, but I'll try to embarrass her. Leah Smith had been involved with that very much so. So I'm proud of the work that's been done to get us to where we are. But there's also issues with issues we've had with funds that have flowed through Department of Human Services, issues we've had in corrections, a population that, we've got to focus on as far as 19,000 plus people incarcerated, 60,000 on probation and parole. That's a lot of people in a state of 3 million that have hindrances to jobs. So as we study, I have asked, and last year we actually passed legislation to create a position at Accelerate for special populations. And I think, the gentleman that's been hired is with us today, and he was copiously taking notes because he's heard about all these special populations and across agencies, the assistance that we can give to encourage people into that workforce. I would ask, as far as the drop in the 16 to 24-year-old work, labor force participation group, 5.9% in the state, do you know what it is nationally? You had mentioned it was also down nationally. Just out of curiosity, I didn't grab that number, but is it a big spread, or is it similar to our drop?
Let me not lie to you. I actually have that in my in my notes that I wasn't looking at, right? I didn't think my presentation was that long, but sorry, y'all.
Because, I mean, there's a couple.
Okay, yeah.
go ahead.
So Mississippi 43.6, the US rate for labor force participation age 16 to 24 is 56.3.
So we're at 40.
We're 43.6.
Was a 10-point spread,
Mhm.
but we had a 5.9% decrease. In
Decrease.
2010. Nationally, did we see a
Oh,
decrease
nationally,
also?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it has been consistently trending downward, particularly after the Great Recession. But there were some hiccups post World War II as well. But I can get that information for you. I just don't know off the top of my head.
And I'm just curious, and this is kind of anecdotal for me, but when you graduated high school, you either went to college or you got a job. Those were your two options. And a lot of times we went to work based on insurance. Is there been any correlation between the continuation of insurance up to age, is it 24 or?
I think it's age 26
Okay.
under the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
This study did not look at insurance coverage and behavioral changes of that population, but I think that is an excellent point. So I'm writing that down because I do think that is a great thing to look at.
And I am very interested in demographic driven information in the populations, just to know where our organizations need to target, whether it's accelerating anyone else. They're speaking in ecosystems. I appreciate you addressing those things in ecosystems. But in women's workforce, labor force participation rate, I would love to know if it's something we can obtain is, we have a 8 or 10% spread between men and women, but then within demographics, there's also categories such as single moms. Because I think that's where a lot of our focus and attention is, what the questions are about transportation, childcare, et cetera. So anything we can do in that realm, because it's my understanding they are a very much increased labor force participation versus the rest of the state, because the buck stops with them. They have to,
Right.
Single parent, but also they're probably the most likely to need upskilling and services because they're a good employee. They're going and making things happen. They just have so many things going on in their life, whether it's training that they need or transportation or childcare. That may be the people that we upskill that doesn't change the number, but it changes lives. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So
no, that's a great point. And I do want to make sure y'all know in this study, in the report you have toward the back, when we looked at or asked NSPARC to look at the 25 contiguous states with the top 25 highest and lowest labor force participation rate, they pulled a list and then they overlaid it with demographic characteristics. One of those is percentage of single parent households. So that might be interesting. But I just want to make sure y'all know it's in this report just a little bit, but not fully what you're saying.
And then the last thing, and this may be for me, and I'll yield any questions to the committee, but education, the biggest factor you stated in associate's degrees, bachelor degrees, the percentage they have. I'm proud they're employed, but are they underemployed? Because just because you're educated does not mean you're underemployed. Tomorrow, we're going to have 4 of our universities. We're going to have community college. We're going to have Accelerate. We're going to have IHL, K-12. We're also wanting to make sure that, our focus as a state dollar is that we're getting an ROI. So I'm proud we're graduating people, but at some point whether it's median income, are they getting what they bargained for with the expectation, with the degree they receive from one of our institutions?
No, that's a great point. And sort of that wage analysis, I will say, I think that would add a lot of color to the report we're talking about today. So very likely that will be in a round 2, but that would be additional context for the educational ROI, I think, is that wage analysis as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your work. Questions, Senator Simmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that presentation. As you indicated, that this is an interim report and it's data, no recommendations. And I do have two areas that I'd like you to try to focus on, if you would. I know you all do wonderful work at Empower, and I know criminal justice reform was one of the things that Grant has always tried to do over at Empower. At the beginning of today, we talked about how Mississippi is a state with the highest incarceration rate in the world. And of course, we hear with Mr. Chairman talking about what we can do about our low workforce participation rate. I would like to see more data demographically on those, I like to call them returning neighbors, those who exit the system, and the counties in which they go back to and how that play a role in the workforce participation rate. And Mr. Chairman mentioned we got about 60,000 or so on probation and parole. I'd just like to see the fact that if they are unemployed, why they are unemployed. I know, and if you could correlate that to some policies that we've had in this building as it relates to whether it's ban the box, whether it's other policies that actually will be a barrier for them getting back into the workforce. Because I just think that a lot of people, in fact, I know a lot of people that I represent, they paying probation fees, they paying their fines, but it's a challenge to them because they can't maintain a job. And a lot of times we do have employers who will just not give them the jobs that they need. And so if we can look at that as it relates to that population. Also, as it relates to, you just stated to Mr. Chairman that there's a map that basically shows the demographics nationally. I forgot what you said, but I'm interested in that map. State what you said one more time about that map.
The 25 high and low counties.
Yes.
Yes. So it's not a map. A map would be better.
Yeah.
It's a chart. But I like the map idea.
This is what I like to see. I would like to see in our 82 counties a map that shows the workforce participation rate by county and overlap that with state investments in those areas, whether it was special projects that came from this building, whether it was projects that came from MDA, whether it was economic development. I know we just had one in Madison County and Marshall County this year. I would like to see the correlation, whether it's positive or negative, regarding state investment per county and how that has affected the workforce participation rate.
Okay.
Thank you.
One thing I will say, Senator Simmons, I did notice when you were speaking earlier, and I thought that was a great point about Mississippi does have among the highest incarceration rates. So when we talk about labor force participation, if the BLS is excluding large numbers of people, this is not positive for our rate. And so I think Dr. Ashley mentioned this earlier, but for August 2024, the labor force was about 1.2 million. I think of Mississippi as having a population of about 3 million. That is 1.7, 1.8 million disappeared. Now, not all of those would be over 16, but I just think that's a really good point you're making. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Senator. And by the way, I apologize if I said 60. There's 40,000 on parole, about 20,000 incarcerated, 60 total. So question, Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. I've just got a question. Maybe if you've got data that speaks to this chart you showed us. In between 2011 and 2014, we had a 6% drop in the participation rate. Any idea why?
Is this just the aggregate chart, the very first one?
Yes, ma'am.
So 2011 and 14?
Well, in that 3-year period, we had a 6% drop in the labor participation rate. And it just seems like there should be data to speak to why that happened. I
will have to look into that. We'll have to do further analysis. I will just point out, though, 2010 was sort of the tail end of Mississippi's experience with the Great Recession. So nationally, that started June 07. We came in, I think, about 12 months later. So when you see that, I think that's why you saw that uptick that next year, but I don't know.
Yeah, the
Right
general
now, they
assumption
fall off.
would be that, but sometimes when you get a little bit more granular in the data, you may find some other causes that are there, just I don't know, perception differences or something. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the committee? Well, thank you very much. I would encourage everybody and thank those who pick this up later on YouTube and everything else that we put out there. But tomorrow we'll start at 9:30 with Dr. Taylor from Accelerate. We will have the Department of Education following that, Community College Board, IHL, and then we will have in the afternoon, Mississippi State, University of Southern Mississippi, Jackson State, and University of Mississippi presenting. So thank you very much. And one last thing on the data. I think our state, it would be good to know public sector, private sector employment, because there have been times in reports I have viewed that we are a heavy public sector employee state. So that might be something to look at as we look at what we're doing in the future. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and we will adjourn for the day till tomorrow morning.